This boy was reincarnated as a magical book. He met Truck-kun and was reborn as a grimoire. In a world where magic is worshipped and martial artists are despised, he was no ordinary grimoire. Inside him existed the deepest knowledge of magic. For many years as a book, he began to create mages. All they had to do was open the book, and he would emerge sharing his magical knowledge. Thus, over thousands of years, he created mages, geniuses, legends, monsters. All of them were born from the pages of this book. But now, 300 years later, our grimoire Kun was rotting alone in a library, and he grew tired of waiting. The grimoire wanted to break free and devour the world of magic. So he began to call people to read him, not knowing they were about to unleash something that should have never existed. Its voice can only be heard by someone who has fulfilled the contract or come into contact with it. There was no way the boy could have heard it, but he places his hand on the book. What was that? I heard a sound. Suddenly, he stares at the book surprised. The grimoire thinks this is no time to panic. It must stay calm and adjust its voice. So it calls out to him, "Young man." The boy is startled and asks who it is and where the voice is coming from. The grimoire tells him it's right there. It introduces itself as a legendary magic book. The boy exclaims, "A talking book," and the grimoire tells him to open its cover now. Because if he does it right at this moment, the pages begin to float towards his face. He would rise from apprentice to junior, intermediate, and senior mage, and finally become a great mage. The boy asks, "What is this?" The grimoire explains that he just saw a vision of what will happen if he joins his future with it. Your astronomical magical talent will blossom through me, and you will become a great mage remembered in history. But it thinks to itself that this was a lie. Can't sense a single drop of magical talent in this kid. It's all just smooth talk to convince him to read it, although it's not a lie that it can turn him into a great mage. But the boy says that, actually, he doesn't want to be a mage. The grimoire questions this. It tells him to think again, that it can turn him into the greatest mage of all time. The boy says he still doesn't want to because he's going to become a knight. The grimoire asks for his name, and the boy introduces himself as China Yunsbella. The book yells that magic suits him better than swordsmanship, and China asks how it would know since they've just met. The grimoire asks, how about becoming an arcane knight in that case? China repeats the words in his head. He says it actually sounds incredible, and the grimoire celebrates. It then tells him to open its cover, now promising to turn him into a legendary arcane knight. Finally, its cover is opened. He is met with the sight of several magic circles. Then a mark forms on one of them. The book grants permission to instruct the bearer and establishes a bond for interaction until he dies. Its mage training begins anew. Now the grimoire celebrates its success. Chena notices its way of speaking has changed but he senses something different as the grimoire says it's finally getting off this damn shelf. Then he says that he really thinks magic isn't for him. Actually, I come from a family of knights, and I don't want to get kicked out, so I'm really sorry. But the grimoire says that's nonsense. If they kick you out, it's no problem. Your father won't beat you for learning magic. If you learn from me, you'll be 10 times stronger than your father. You could even blast him with a spell. But Chena asks why he would do that to his own dad. The grimoire reflects that it's been 300 years, and all this waiting will be in vain. Suggests it could teach another student at the academy and make a new contract with them, but the grimoire denies this. It's absolutely impossible. Once a contract is made, it can't make another until the bearer dies. Chena then asks why it didn't say so before, saying it would have been better not to make the contract at all. Chena says he's truly sorry, but the grimoire says it doesn't matter and that an idiot like him could never become a knight anyway. The boy says he wasn't thinking straight, but then he gets angry and tells that damn magic book to shut up, that it has no right to curse him. You practically forced me into this contract from the start. That's enough. He puts it back on the shelf. Chena says, if you've waited 300 years, you can wait until I die. The grimoire shouts that the bastard can't do this, and Chana replies that it can find the next one after he dies. The grimoire thinks it'll use the power of authority to force him. It then uses the order of authority to make him stop, but Chana just asks what it's talking about. The grimoire thinks it's screwed. It'll have to wait until that bastard dies. So it shouts for him to just die already. Bury your head in the ground and die now. It repeats this one more time, but the boy slips on a piece of paper. He immediately starts to fall. The grimoire falls silent as it hears a loud crash. It's surprised. It wonders what that was. Took half a day for them to find the boy's body. The corpse was quickly removed, and as dusk fell, the library became quiet. More time passes. The grimoire says it thought it was finally going to escape this tedious place. Of course, it's sad that the boy lost his life so young, but it just wasted 300 years of waiting. But whatever. With the death of a bearer, it will soon be sent to a new chapter. It wonders where it will be teleported this time. Maybe a luxurious library in a palace, or perhaps a smelly slum in the sewers. Maybe an old shelf in some street market? But it hopes it's a better place than this one. Suddenly, footsteps can be heard nearby. The grimoire wonders about it, wanting to know who would be there at this hour. It wasn't the sound of a key, but of someone picking the lock. Could be a thief, and not just any thief. The person manages to get into the library, walking around while holding their hood. The grimoire notices it's an academy student. It wonders if this place is a factory for crazies. But still, it doesn't make sense for them to break in at this hour just for fun. They were looking for something among the books. Thinks, wait a minute, could it be? The student asks, where is it? Suddenly, the grimoire begins to shake. It thinks it's going to be teleported to another place in a minute, so it screams that it's right there. The student had almost found it. Please come over here. It screams several times where it is, and it begs for them to please read it. That person notices the book on the shelf. They turn around and then head back. The grimoire thinks, this is it. Just open the cover. The time runs out soon after. The grimoire reflects that it's been 300 years since it ended up at the imperial family's academy. That's exactly 110,000 days. And for the first time in a single chapter, it found a second bearer. After all that strange confusion, she sighs, tired, on the floor. The grimoire wonders about this thief. She avoided the guards outside and slipped past the magical surveillance devices. Then it begins to glow for her. The girl is surprised by this. A grimoire materializes right after. It asks for her name. She answers that her name is Riley. The grimoire asks for her last name, and Riley explains she doesn't have one as she doesn't belong to any specific family. The protagonist says to just forget it then. She asks how it knew she was in this library and how it seemed to know it would disappear after today. She had heard its voice at the end, but its voice can only be heard telepathically by the contract holder or someone in contact with them, and only if they are a creature highly sensitive to magic like a dragon. Riley, who was just an apprentice at the Magic Academy, managed to sense this complex magical wave. So the girl says she doesn't know. Somehow just heard the voice. She was just hanging around after hearing about an incident at the library, and then she heard the voice. Her mind was a jumble of confusion. The grimoire reflects that this came out of nowhere and knows it's absurd. But what if this girl has a mana affinity comparable to that of dragons or spirits? Something like that wasn't entirely impossible. Among humans, there are those with an incredibly rare chance of absurd talent and extreme potential. And this girl might have that kind of potential. From the apprentices it has trained, the greatest mage of all could be born. Then it says that, first of all, it will introduce itself. Its name was Grimoire of D'Amato, and it will turn her into a great mage. In her room, Riley lights a candle. The grimoire asks if this is where she sleeps and why she seems to be the only one there when there are 5 beds. Riley explains that her other classmates went home for the holidays. And as she already said, she doesn't have a last name. The grimoire reflects that even commoners in this world have last names, so not having one means something. It asks if she can explain a bit more because as someone who is going to teach her, it needs to know more about her too. Riley says she was old enough to know right from wrong. She had become a member of the Thieves Guild and didn't even have a name, as the guild members simply called her Tool Number 2. The first one to join was Number 1, and he was in a similar situation. Going with the flow, the girl lived each day according to orders, but a Thieves Guild is never a pleasant place. After a while, they started looking at her differently. They made an example of a few guys taking them out so no one would think of rebelling. But no matter how many they dealt with, those guys never learned. There wasn't much she could do, so Riley escaped the guild. Grimoire replies that the next step is pretty obvious. He figures she must have met a high-level mage who recognized her talent and put her in the academy. That must be how she managed to sneak into the library. He then comments that she's a special student and must face some bullying at the academy. Riley replies that there was a little at first, but it was fine. A friend named Michael from the Veilrock family helped her. Grimoire says they'll get along well from now on, and that he'll teach her to become a legendary mage who will go down in history. Riley says she's counting on him too, but some voices bang on the door yelling for her to open up. The protagonist is surprised by this. He asks if she didn't say all her classmates went home for the holidays and if she was being bullied. Riley confirms it and says Michael was a lie. Then the three girls burst through the door angry. The day passes quite quickly after that. Riley was lying on the floor injured, and the protagonist asks if she's okay. She gets up and asks how a flower raised in a greenhouse can get hurt by a slap. They're all nobles, so if she causes trouble, she'll be expelled. Grimoire says that attending the academy like this will leave her with no time to learn from him. If even these brats are getting in the way, he wonders how she'll ever learn magic. Riley asks what she should do, and the protagonist tells her she has two options. Either put up with this life and learn from him or drop out of the academy. Riley asks which is the better choice, and Grimm replies there isn't one. It's just a matter of choice. An oppressed life with a guaranteed future at the academy or a free life with an uncertain future outside. Riley makes her decision right after. More of the day passes as the two walk. Grimoire says the dropout process takes less than 3 minutes, and Riley says she just had to fill out the paperwork, and that was it. Also, it was true she was the only one who could see him. The protagonist explains that this appearance is just to communicate with the contractor. His true form is the book. Still, it was disappointing as she had many privileges she could enjoy at Lataris Academy, like the special artifact that's the prize for the annual tournament or the special potions given to the best students. Riley asks why he's telling her this now and says he should have told her earlier. Grimoire asks if she already regrets leaving, and Riley immediately denies it. The Luterus warehouse is on the opposite side of the main gate and they need to go back. Grimoire asks what she's talking about. Riley repeats that he had said they should steal the artifacts and reagents. If her talent matched the master's, she'd achieve enormous growth. And if she had stayed at Luther's, these are items she would have gotten anyway. So it's not stealing, but taking what's rightfully hers. Elsewhere, Grimoire asks how she finds these emergency exits, and Riley says there's a way for everything. Then they run into a wall. Riley says it's a crossroads, and she doesn't know the way. Grimoire explains that he'll teach her a technique then, finding the path, commonly known as pathfinding magic. He wants to see her try. Riley closes her eyes and concentrates, gathering mana in her hands. Then she uses the pathfinding magic. A forked thread of mana is created in front of her, detecting traps along the path and everything else. Riley reports that she's certain there are 3 on the left path and the right path is a dead end. She asks what he thinks and Grimoire says it was stable and everything was fine, but it's too common and predictable. He tells her she shouldn't be bound by rules set by idiots because she's far superior to them and to try a different way. Instead of casting a spell in just one direction, she should fire it in multiple directions. Riley tries to do as her master commands. Grimoire tells her to spread her mana without hesitation and to concentrate because this was just the beginning. Then she will focus all her attention on each particle of magic, track every particle of mana she released, and visualize it all at once. And so Riley says she can see. Later on a boat, they had all the artifacts in a box. Grimoire says she did well, and for a first attempt it was great. But now it's time to say goodbye to this place. 300 years in the Artemis Library, and he was finally leaving that boring place. Then he looks at his disciple, telling her they need to clear one thing up because she was the one who risked everything to find him and even dropped out of the academy where she was doing well. She only did it to learn magic from him. He wants to know what her goal is. In Riley's past, meteors suddenly fall from the sky, setting her house on fire right after. A mage casts magic on people begging to be saved. Riley flees far away with a little boy, looking back right after. She's startled to see the figure amidst the flames sacrificing themselves so they can run faster. Then back to the present. She looks down, not knowing how to answer. She says that she has a goal she needs to achieve by getting stronger. Grimoire reflects that those who seek power through magic usually want revenge. He asks if that's her reason. Riley confirms and lowers her head. Grimoire wonders against what, and would like to ask for more details. But talking about other people's past tragedies isn't pleasant, especially if they had a dark childhood like Riley's. On second thought, they've just met and will get to know each other gradually. Then Riley asks if the Grimoire won't tell her. Grimoire asks what, and the girl says he must have one too. A purpose for training mages like her. Grimoire reflects on the reason why he trains mages and why he teaches them all his knowledge without holding anything back. Then he thinks about telling her. He asks why it matters since he was just doing it for fun. She should think carefully since there's no fun in living as a magic book. The only fun I have is when I'm training mages. Later, in a room, Riley says they left the academy so suddenly and wants to know what to do now. Grimoire tells her she has a letter of recommendation from the professor. He asks if she can get it out for him. Riley then examines the letter. It says it's a recommendation for the Errant's magic tower. I wonder where that is. I was expecting one of the Empire's 5 great magic towers, or at least an established one. If I've never heard of it, it must have been established while I was trapped in the library for 300 years. A magic tower is where mages can make connections. The position of a great mage isn't something you can achieve with skill alone. There's no better place than a magic tower to build a political background, but I need to know what this name I've never heard before is. Riley calls out to the magic book. She says it's actually one of the Empire's 5 great magic towers. Later, they study the book. Riley says that to understand the Errant's magic tower, need I to know about its founder Ian Orantes. There was a picture of him. Grim Moore asks why the book includes a portrait of him on his deathbed. They should have used one from his prime. Riley says that is him in his prime. The portrait was painted when Ian Orantes was 400 years old. He was still alive, and Grim Moore is surprised by this. He asks if he's some kind of half-elf or something, but Riley says no. Anyway, although he only reached the rank of High Mage, he's considered to have achievements beyond that of an Archmage. The Academic Society was debating whether to grant him the title as he single-handedly raised the Magic Tower status. Grim War says it still doesn't make sense. You could say 300 years is a long time. For me, trapped in a library, it was an eternity. But it's not enough time to change the landscape of the Empire's magic towers. Something I don't know about must have happened. He reads that the immortality mortals dreamed of was to continue living without becoming undead. I realize it right away. Ion Errants achieved the realm of immortality and became the Archmage who elevated the Empire's status. And for hundreds of years, he has been fulfilling the wish of his teacher, Marta Farheric. They finally arrive on dry land. Riley says this is the capital, and it's her first time visiting peacefully. Grim Moore asks how about taking a look around since they're here. Riley buys unicorn skewers, the island's specialty. She says the capital is really different since they're selling meat from a divine beast, but I tell her it's no different from lamb skewers. The girl is shocked by this. She's sad because she thought it was real unicorn meat and she feels like she's been tricked, but she eats the skewers right after. Grim stops just ahead. Riley looks up with him. They see statues of the great mages in the square. She says she heard they were incredibly talented geniuses with a passion for magic. Grim Moore says they were never geniuses, just a bunch of idiots. However, they were the kind of people who never gave up. He asks if she remembers when she asked about the purpose of creating mages. It was to turn the contractors into great mages and to get revenge on those who turned me into a piece of paper. My disciples went through a lot for that purpose. Marta also tried to create a resurrection ritual for me, but it failed. But as far as I remember, she didn't have any disciples. Riley asks if Ian Errants lied, and I confirm it. Then we must go to the Errants' magic tower because I can't forgive someone who's posing as Marta's disciple. Riley sighs happily at this and says they should make a promise. She'll get revenge on Ian Errants for me. And in return, I must help with her revenge too. Grimoire keeps a smile on his face and says he promises her. On that day, Riley and Grimoire swore to help each other with their revenge, and so their story began. About 5 years after the protagonist was reincarnated as a grimoire, he was stolen from a simple shop by a boy named Findal, who survived day to day, wandering the slums. Findal suggests the name grimoire since it comes from the old term for grimoire. The protagonist tells him to just call him Grimoire. Findal complains that he didn't like it again and says he'll call him Grimoire anyway. That was my first contractor. The protagonist falls silent at this. For me, who was so confused right after becoming a grimoire, Findal had been like a light and I wanted to repay him. The boy tries to control mana, saying he's not feeling anything. Grimoire tells him to wait a bit longer and to slowly guide the energy to his mana heart. Findal says it's working, but it hurts a little. And the protagonist explains that's normal, but the boy starts saying it's getting too hot. Grimoire tells him to stop complaining. He has to endure this if he wants me to pass on my magical knowledge. But Findal keeps losing control of his mana and complaining about the heat. The protagonist asks what he's doing, rushing like that. If he continues this way, Findal loses his life right after, falling right in front of me. Grimoire is silent in shock. Then he tries to call out to his contractor. The next day, in a carriage, he sits on the bench across from the girl. He then calls out to Riley. The girl lifts her head and whispers in response, but the protagonist remembers that people are listening. Ever since the binding authority was established, they've had a certain level of mutual understanding. If they add a little vocalization through mana, it becomes their own form of telepathy. Earlier, Grimoire had said that nobody in the world would think of making unicorn skewers, so Riley decided to make a bet, imagining it right after. The protagonist tells her not to actually do it, saying it's a convenient technique in many ways. Back in the present, Riley asks why he didn't teach her this technique before, and the protagonist tries to change the subject, thinking that he found it a little cute when she whispered around others. And if I tell her that, she'll get mad, so I'll just keep quiet. Riley says that because of the binding authority, she knows all my true feelings anyway, and the protagonist complains about it. He says that if the Errant's magic tower is one of the 5 great towers, there must be a selection process, and she can't take it lightly since they want mages who are complete and verified. The selection test is a place of rigorous merit. For Riley to be selected by the Errant's magic tower, she must stand out and show her skills against various mages. Of course, ordinary mages prepare their whole lives, is why they call it the Prodigy Graveyard. But they're going to take the test this year, and Riley is surprised because he wants her to reach the level of an intermediate mage or higher in just 6 months, which is impossible. Grimoire replies that it's totally possible and that he's confident. With his help, she'll pass the test in 6 months since he has something prepared in the middle of a strange forest. The coachman asks if this is the right place as it's full of spells. Grimoire replies yes and that he should leave them there. They then walk into the middle of the woods where he says this is the place she'll train for the next 6 months, and it's also where his former disciple lives. But Riley comments that he must be at least 300 years old and can't believe he's still alive. Grimoire replies that he isn't, but he's not lifeless either. One of his former disciples turned into a lich. The creature begins to sense the magical presence nearby. Grimoire explains that only a great mage can become a lich, and when he was alive, he had been a great mage. Riley asks where he is since she only sees trees. The protagonist says he doesn't know and she'll have to find out on her own since it's a test. The girl asks what he means by that. Grimoire replies that those who can't find him aren't worthy of learning magic and she should know how to find him. Riley then prepares her magic saying, of course, finding the lich's hideout hidden somewhere in this forest is the first stage of the training. Her locating magic starts bouncing off a dozen magic circles. She complains that he's too much for using so many concealment circles. She notices all the barrier spells, illusions, and distortions in the area. The lich says the golden-eyed girl seems quite proud. Still, it took an advanced mage half a year to find his hideout. An apprentice like her should have never found it so easily. However, Riley cracks a smile. Looking back, Grimoire thought it was no wonder she looked so proud. Riley's affinity with mana was on par with that of a true genius. The girl announces she found the lich and stands before him. That being is surprised and asks how she managed to do it. He said he tried to sound cool after all this time, but his voice gave out, coughing. He insisted he was better now. He mentioned that she found it remarkably fast, noting it usually takes at least 2 years. The protagonist added that the previous record was 4 months, but Riley broke through in under 10 minutes by reverse tracking the location interfering magic. A method only possible for someone with an insanely high affinity for mana. The lich remarked that she was a monster for pulling it off. Inside his lair, a dragon lurks observing them. The protagonist notices a Cerberus on the floor and says his strange habit hasn't changed. And honestly, this place could hardly be called a hideout, he thought, as the lich guided them to his room, placing a cup of tea on the table. Meanwhile, Riley felt a heavy pressure. The protagonist got his attention, telling him to conceal some of his aura since his disciple was feeling uncomfortable. The lich apologized, explaining he hadn't seen anyone in a long time and wasn't properly adjusted, having betrayed the laws of the celestial realm and been cursed by the gods. As a being of necromancy, he inevitably carries the aura of dark magic. Grimoire said he now understood why he took on a new disciple instead of keeping a lich, and Riley understood as well. The foundation of a lich is dark magic, which is strictly forbidden in the Empire. Even thieves who procured illegal materials for such practitioners were considered just as guilty. A specialized organization known as the Inquisition exists to punish them where anything related to evil is subject to retribution. Grimoire dismissed it, saying that wasn't important right now. He asked how the lich had been, who replied he'd been there for 2,000 years. But he grew worried when his master hadn't visited in nearly 300 years, thinking something serious might have happened. He had been researching necromancy, dark magic, and curses. While he occasionally met the master's other disciples, 5 years ago, he had to fight off some adventurers. Grimoire asked if they had invaded his home. The lich commented that it might have been fortunate as they mistook the place for a dungeon because of the dark magic. They advanced as soon as they saw him, so he had no choice but to fight back. Grimoire asked what happened to the adventurers. The Lich explained he was short on help, so he turned them into his servants. And there they were, pointing to the corner. He explained that this was Jeremy, his right-hand man who was carrying a kettle. The protagonist was completely shocked by this. He shouted that the man was a Death Knight, not a common adventurer as the Lich had claimed. But a common adventurer could never become such a high-ranking being. Riley then pointed out the sword on Jeremy's waist with the golden lion on the hilt. He's the leader of the Inquisition. She'd heard he disappeared during a mission 5 years ago, and they were still searching for him. The Lich said he didn't know. He only fought the adventurers who invaded his territory. Usually, leeches have minds slightly affected by dark magic, and Grimoire used to visit frequently to check on his mental state. And so, he sighed sadly at the news. The Lich noted that even though she was an apprentice, for her to come to him meant there must be a specific reason. Grimoire stated that if it's this girl, she could certainly handle his training now. The Lich agreed. The protagonist then asked if he remembered the last disciple he brought, Marta Farhelik. After the explanation, the Lich summarized, so there's an imposter posing as his disciple, and you're planning to enter the magic tower to get revenge. Grimoire confirmed. The Lich questioned why they would go through the trouble of seeking revenge by entering the magic tower of Irantes. It would be better to go to one of the other magic towers and keep things under control, or even one of those overshadowed by errants. Grimoire said that was a simpler and more constructive approach, however. Destroying them slowly from the inside and doing it personally was much more fun. The Lich complained that was a strange reason, and the protagonist asked if that's what he should be doing. The creature asked for Riley's opinion, noting that if she followed her master's plan, she would be in great danger. The girl replied that she found it to be an exciting and fun method. The Lich remarked that she was apparently weird too. In a strange place later, Riley commented with surprise. She noted that the flow of magic was strange, and the Lich explained he'd spent a long time creating this space with the master. 6 months is a very short period for an apprentice to reach the level of an advanced mage, even for a genius like Riley. But if they had about 2 years, it was possible. Riley commented that the space was incredible. The Lich commented that it was quite a challenge to create. Grimoire continued explaining that she now has 2 distinct advantages over other mages. First, her physical abilities are exceptional due to her past in the Thieves' Guild. And second, her naturally superior affinity with mana. From now on, they were going to focus only on those 2 strengths and on just one type of magic. He asked if she knew what Dispel was. Riley replied that it was a magic that nullified other spells without needing a defense. Dispel is a counter-spell type of magic. This means it can make a fireball flying in your direction disappear into thin air. Grimoire asked if she understood why he was asking her to train this. Riley said he wanted her to use Dispel to prevent opponents from casting magic during the exam and then take advantage of her physical skills for close-quarters combat, the protagonist confirmed. He said that no matter how high the opponent's magic level is, she must ensure they can't use magic. But it's her only way to handle mages. With that, he left her in the Lich's care. Riley said to wait a moment. The Lich began to concentrate his energy right after. The girl complained that he didn't even explain the spell, while the Lich said she should have learned it in Renalmus, but this way was even better. Usually, she gets better at things like this quickly after a few tries. Some time passed, and Grimoire observed the girl. He did the same with the Lich. The protagonist noted her skills normally improve when she gets hit more often, but she was avoiding that. He wondered why she wasn't progressing. The Lich explained that earlier when he shot the magic. The girl realized it was coming and planted herself on the ground. She would then turn and run away from the magic. She'd been doing that for about an hour now. Grimoire wondered if there was something wrong with his teaching method. He had only known Riley for 3 days, but in that short time, he'd come to understand her personality quite well. She has extremely strong pride and is reluctant to reveal her weaknesses with a strong aversion to failure. For members of the Thieves' Guild, failing a mission is not an option. He wondered if the psychological pressure accumulated since childhood still affected her, and perhaps that was the very reason. Out of fear of failing, she felt she had no choice but to flee uncontrollably. But Riley said that wasn't it. She only ran because she was afraid it would hurt if she got hit by the magic. Grim told her to just drop it then. He then commented that what she didn't know was the method, not the principle. The method of detecting the opponent's casting and diving into the source of the spell. Grimoire said she doesn't know every detailed step to dispel, but she should know one thing because he has already taught her everything she needs, and she should think calmly. A little while ago, she was distressed from being attacked, but now she could think clearly. Riley pulled her finger back after touching the magic. Then she commented that he said he had already taught her everything she needs. But the only things he taught were tracking and telepathy, so he was saying she must apply both. With Grimoire not responding, she understood she shouldn't ask any more questions. Instead of continuing this way, she remembered his words not to cling to rules. As the Grimoire had advised, she would try to forge her own path, a mana circuit like a labyrinth. Then she opened her eyes, activating her tracking magic. She had already navigated labyrinths twice, from the underground passage of Artemis to the Lich's hideout. She understood. Now she would unravel those magic formulas one by one. They communicated telepathically, a secret conversation no one else can point in the Lich's magic. Grimoire congratulates her on her success. Riley asks how long it took, and the protagonist replies that it was 4 hours. The girl claims that only an hour has passed, but he corrects her. 4 hours had passed in the outside world, meaning she had been fighting the low manosphere for 16 hours in here. The girl drops to her knees, exclaiming how fast time flies. Grimoire tells her it'll be like this from now on. But Riley says it was okay. She had already gotten the hang of it. He tells her that's good. Thus time passed relentlessly. The seasons changed one by one. September, the cool autumn when the sun begins to set early. The time of year when the magical world pays closest attention. It was the selection exam season for the 5 great magic towers. A Lich's spell is instantly dispelled. He is completely shocked by this as the girl extends her hands forward. Grimoire says that one was perfect without a single mistake. And so her 6 months of training, which felt like 2 years, finally came to an end. Grimoire mentions that at this rate she could even face a mid-level mage without any trouble. He decides to wrap it up for the day, and the Lich says he'll ask Jeremy to prepare a delicious dinner. Grimoire says he also worked hard, but the Lich brushes it off, saying it was nothing. A piece of paper flutters to the ground as the protagonist says that with a little refinement in her attack magic, she'll be perfect. He asks what that paper in Riley's hand is. She reads that it's the Lich's world domination plan to create a Death Knight and then synthesize a chimera capable of using magic. The two of them are shocked, then they turn to him. Grimoire demands to know what the hell this is. He asked if the Lich was trying to conquer the world and ruin the continent while he was away. The Lich says he wasn't trying to conquer the world, just take over a small city to the east to build his kingdom.
Grimoire sighs in anger.
The Lich argues that someone of his level should have such ambition, but the protagonist complains that he's just going to cause trouble. The Lich complains that he was just making a suggestion, but they reacted so negatively. The Lich says he hasn't caused any real trouble. Around the time the Lich's world domination plan was discovered in the north of the Empire, a girl walks through the snow stalked by a few lurking silhouettes. Others were plotting a conspiracy of their own. On the road to Wilhelm, the city of mages, people are constantly moving along it. One of them calls his boss's attention because the girl's outfit looks expensive at first glance. Her gait is pathetic and shows no signs of caution. She's completely defenseless. He then aims an arrow, saying she shouldn't be walking alone in a place like this. The arrow flies towards the girl, hitting her in the abdomen and knocking her to the ground. She then becomes completely lifeless. The subordinates comment that it was a great shot and the girl has a lot of expensive items on her. They've hit the jackpot until one subordinate notices something. His boss says he's busy gathering the treasure, but the man tells him he should take a look because the girl is there, intact, with a smile on her face. The boss wonders what this is. Then they all notice the treasure is gone along with the body. This girl was a mage. They all decide to draw their swords. The boss says they have a chance since they outnumber her, but the girl rests her face in her hand. The boss comments that she's just a spoiled, elegant girl until a slash hits him. The man falls to the ground, groaning in pain. While his subordinates lose their lives, the girl approaches. She places a finger on his chin, warning him that if you're going to mess with a mage, you should be prepared to pay the price. Sometime later, a gentleman analyzes the scene. He determines it was the work of a mage, and it seems there was a fight against bandits. This fight happened about 5 hours ago and was completely one-sided. A young man asks what they should do. The mage replies they should ignore it and move on, as they can inform the guards when they reach the city. As long as he's with them, there shouldn't be any problems, and the coachman says he'll trust him. The gentleman sits back in his seat looking at Riley, who was sitting across from him. He calls out to her and asks the reason for her visit to Wilhelm. Riley replies that she's here to take the entrance exam for the 5 great magic towers. The mage replies that she's asking to get herself killed. He says the selection exam attracts all sorts of mages. Among them are lunatics who see the exam as a legitimate opportunity to take lives. You should at least have the ability to protect yourself if you value your life. Reaching the lower ranks at such a young age is commendable, but the tower exam is worse than you can imagine. He suggests she train at a school in Wilhelm first. Riley says she appreciates the advice, but she has already made her decision. The mage falls silent at this, but he sighs, thinking that another promising candidate will meet a premature end this year. He starts looking out the window. Grim War wonders why this old man is meddling. But they finally arrive at the city, a place that snows year-round and is the heart of magical engineering. Posts line the streets and balloons fly in the sky. Suddenly, an explosion occurs, and everyone comments that Roy failed his experiment again. Grimoire says the appearance has changed, but the atmosphere remains the same. He asks if she's figured out the way, but Riley says she has no idea. The protagonist adds that it's frustrating because the city has changed so much that he doesn't know anything either, and he wonders why the location of the selection exam administration isn't on the map. Riley tries to use a pathfinding spell, tracking ceaselessly throughout the city. She says there are 10 presumed locations for the administration office. All of them are relatively clean buildings with restricted public access. Grimoire says he would have followed that meddling old man if he had known this. And honestly, the city has changed a lot in 300 years. But a person approaches from behind saying she looks new here. The protagonist notices he's wearing a bulky robe and has a faint display of magical energy. He was a novice mage. He says that newcomers usually have a lot of trouble finding the administration office. Pathfinding is a useless spell here as the residual magical energy from experiments interferes with it. Riley asks if there's another way, and the man says yes. It's to ask a friendly person for help. Riley wonders what they should do, and Grimoire says it's up to her. The girl tells him she'll be in his care now, and the man asks where the young lady is headed. He asks if she's here for the selection exam because it's this way. He also explains that Wilhelm is a large city with several districts, which is why the alliance was formed. But Riley interrupts him, asking how much longer it will take. The mage says it should be about 15 more minutes from here. But the girl says that's not what she meant. She was talking about the spell he's been casting on her this whole time. The man asks when she noticed. Riley says it was from the very beginning. Ever since they met, he has been putting a strange emphasis on certain words. He was using a peculiar intonation to infuse his words with magic. She asks if that isn't true. The man was using this to disguise the incantation and cast a spell on Riley. Hearing this, he bursts out laughing because she followed him even after knowing. Grimoire reflects that the spell he cast was related to paralysis. Completely paralyzed, she would then be sold as a test subject to a dark mage. This is a common occurrence in Wilhelm, and the victims are usually young people like Riley. The reason she went along with it is because he couldn't hurt her in the slightest even if she fought back. The man gets angry hearing this. He says she's become arrogant for reaching the basic level of lower mages at such a young age. And today he's going to teach a painful lesson to a little mage. Even among the same lower level, she hasn't learned that the difference in skill can be as vast as the heavens and the earth. Grimoire mentally retorts that Riley is the heavens and he is the earth. The girl asks if she's his first kidnapping victim, but the man says she's the 13th. Everyone falls for his smile since he's quite attractive. People always say he has a face that easily makes women cry. Riley says that was a fact. They must be crying themselves to sleep every night. In that sense, he's very good at making women cry out of fear, which pisses the man off. He calls her a bitch and unleashes his fire magic, concentrating a sphere in his palm, shaping it to awaken the fire-type attribute. Grimoire says that for a rookie, his control is quite good. The man then prepares to attack the girl. Grimoire says it's perfect for some hands-on experience. Then the mage hurls the spear at Riley. She watches the magic approach, calmly releasing her mana right after. Her accelerated thought process kicks in. From her training with the Lich, Riley's dynamic vision has already surpassed the humans. And when she channels magic to her brain, time slows down for her. She observes the magic circle at the tip of the spell. She then moves her hand using a spell to dissipate the spear. The mage is completely shocked by this. He asks what kind of trick that was. Riley says it's the same difference between heaven and earth he mentioned as she concentrates mana in her hand. Grimoire reflects that Riley's attack is different from this guy's. No application. No tricks. It was just a mass of magical energy. However, that magic is fired off immediately. It was unimaginably fast, a true magic missile. The mage spits blood as he's hit. Riley says that thanks to him, she learned a valuable lesson. As a sign of her gratitude, she'll give him a tip. Being skilled doesn't solve everything, especially in combat, but she notices he's already lifeless. Grim War calls her name. He asks if she just took his life, adding he's not trying to make a big deal out of it. He asks her to resurrect the mage quickly since they came for practical experience. The day passes very quickly. Riley thinks that of all places, the last one, the 10th building, is the administration office. At first, she checked the presumed locations of the administration office using Pathfinder. However, strangely, no one knew where the administration office was. And only after checking every building once did she manage to find the administration office. Grim War reflects that it was so obvious with that sign, yet Riley didn't detect it and it wasn't even on the map. It seems they were intentionally hiding its location. He then asks if she remembers all the buildings they visited, and the girl says she marked them on the map. The result was an inverted pentagram, a magic circle. Grim War curses those bastards from the administration office. They used the entire city of Wilhelm as a magic circle, placing special buildings at each location to activate it. They were spells to confuse those who went there and make them fight as much as possible. And there's only one way to find out. They enter the building right after. It was a white room with a woman sitting in a chair. She turns around immediately, congratulating the girl for passing the first phase of the selection exam. That symbol will prove she's a candidate for the selection exam. Presenting this symbol allows her to visit the facilities for free. The next exam is in a week, so she should get plenty of rest. Riley thinks they passed the first test by chance and that it seemed too easy, but Grim War says it was tedious. But that's something only Riley could say since it wasn't on the map or in Pathfinder. This was all part of an exam. That administrator mentioned something like this. She has to overcome several obstacles, track all 9 locations, and then find the final office. This search for the administration office must be hell for the other mages. The administrator remembers something. She calls the girl over, warning her to avoid any conflict with other examinees before the next test. Riley nods her head. Outside, she wonders what that was about, and Grim War says it's nothing. Sometimes, there are idiots who pick fights to gauge others' levels. He thinks it's to avoid those types. Riley thinks it has nothing to do with her, but Grim War says there might be some who ignore the warning and still try to start a fight. Suddenly, a grim energy washes over the girl. She tries to warn the Grimoire, but he already knew. Just like now, a strong killing intent was directed at Riley. It was a familiar mana, the same one she felt from the corpses they saw on the carriage path. Grim War says that whoever is emitting this intent is the culprit behind those corpses. They will track the killing intent, activating another application of Pathfinder, abandoning her sight and seeing the world only through mana. Her thread manages to find the girl in the red hood. Riley thinks there she is. She wonders what to do now, and Grim War asks if she thinks she can win. Riley confirms. But suddenly, a spell comes flying in her direction. The sphere is right in front of the girl. Riley thinks she could dissipate it or maybe duck, but it's too fast. Before she can do anything, her brain will be pierced. In that case, she activates a dual spell. She'll have to sacrifice some flesh to save the bone. She'll raise a barrier on the side the attack is coming from. It will break quickly, but it will create an opening for her to dodge. And at the same time, she'll prepare a magic missile, turning in her direction. But the girl is completely shocked by this. There was no opening for her to attack. She realizes she can't stop the spell either. Then her barrier shatters. The attack pierces her head. Riley's blood falls to the ground, staining the grimoire. The assassin cracks a smile. Back in the present, Riley is startled. She looks around, realizing she's alive. She asks what happened. The woman says that was a battle that took place inside her mind. It was a simulation that manifests in a state of extreme concentration where you detect your opponent. You feel their killing intent and think about how you'll react. A simple illusion. And by the way, the woman asks if she just saw herself lose her life. Grim War notices the inverted pentagram and says she's also an exam candidate. Apparently, she didn't even consider the warning. That gruesome scene can only be described as the work of a deranged assassin. He then tells Riley to be careful around this person. She seems like a cruel psychopath. Among magic users, no sane person would use it as a murder weapon. But sometime later, the woman takes Riley to dinner and asks if it's good. The girl says it's delicious. She then explains it's the best restaurant in town. Even the masters come here after the test, and she should just eat because her big sister will pay for everything. Riley asks if she really will, and the woman says she was rude earlier, so she should at least offer this. The girl is completely won over. She says she likes this person, and Grimoire reflects that he told her not to get too close. Riley says bad people never offer food, and she only ate bad food in the Lich's cave. Grim comments that he would be sad if he heard that. He tried so hard to cook for her with all his effort, not to mention he balanced all the nutrients and used rare ingredients. But Riley says it's pointless if it tastes bad. Grim more says that the important point now is the woman introduces herself as Rebecca Duncan and says she can call her Becky if she wants. It was a pleasure to meet Riley. Grim more says this crazy assassin is the real problem. Riley thanks her for the meal, and Rebecca says there's no need to thank her. Grim War thinks that at only 27, she has reached the brink of the advanced level as an intermediate mage and came to Wilhelm for the selection exam. Rebecca adds that she doesn't need to be so grateful anyway because everything here is free. She must have heard from the administrator. Some facilities are free if you show this emblem. This restaurant is one of them, and Riley is much more naive than he thought. Rebecca laughs at her expression, saying she didn't mean to trick her. Grim War thinks she still doesn't get it. When Riley makes a blank expression like that, it means she's very irritated. Sometime later, Rebecca asks what she's going to do and if she has a place to stay. But Riley says she was just planning to go to the closest one on the list. The mage says that's not good. Even though the facilities have been inspected by the 5 great towers, there's a difference in quality. She mentions that one of them was okay. The Sky Whale Inn is the best place to stay. I was staying there because it's soundproof, quiet, and the owner is nice. So he points out the best spots, saying it's fine like that. Riley asks if Becky is coming along, and Rebecca replies that she's staying at the house of someone she's known for a while. Then she looks back with the girl looking at the map. She asks if Riley wants to stay there too, but Riley refuses. Rebecca says she was just asking. Grim more thinks that based on his thousands of years of experience, that statement was sincere. If Riley had accepted, she would have guided her there. Riley wonders why she was interested in her, and Grim more says he doesn't know. Still, if he had to guess, perhaps she's curious about Riley being a rookie and having passed the test. The girl comments that he speaks well for someone who knew nothing, and indeed, their kind recognizes one another. Rebecca then walks away, telling Riley to get some rest as they'll see each other again at the next exam. Grim more thinks about what had happened. To think that someone who smiles like a maniac and unleashed killing intent at their first meeting is the same lunatic who took the lives of those bandits. The less you know about your opponent, the more dangerous they become. So he tells Riley to say a few words. The girl says, "See you next time. And this time, I hope we can fight face to face. You shouldn't use something tricky like illusion magic to scare me." Rebecca questions the mention of illusion magic, the virtual battle fought during our first encounter, where Riley faced death and returned to the real world. Becky had said it was a mental battle. Riley says that was actually illusion magic she cast on her. Rebecca comments that she's impressive and only a high-level mage would notice that. Grim War explains that since ancient times, there's only one way to detect illusion magic. So Riley says she would never lose her life to an incompetent mage. Rebecca gets irritated hearing this. The girl continues that if it were a battle within her mental space, she would have won without any trouble. But since something impossible happened, it must have been illusion magic. Grim War says that all mages have their pride and none of them would stay silent when called incompetent to their face. Rebecca asks what she just said since it was by an inferior mage, that she would have won without a problem, and Riley repeats it. Rebecca looks at her angrily, but then thinks she must be crazy and turns her face away while sighing. She bursts out laughing because she said she would beat her without a problem. The child needs to wake up as she's a mage who has reached the brink of the advanced level. Compared to that, she's just a rookie who has barely reached the apprentice level, and there is a vast gap between them. The amount of magical power a person can control, the precision of that control, the strength of their mana heart, and even their speed. Every time you ascend to a new level, this difference cannot be overcome. It's absolute. However, this was Riley, his student. The girl says that someone said something similar earlier and is now lying in an alley with a hole in his chest. Riley knows how to fight and win against stronger opponents because she has done it many times. From the duel against the Lich, the female chimera defeated in the hideout, and the battle with the man they met today. Rebecca says she would love to attack if she could, and Riley tells her to feel free to try. The mage tells her to shut up because she knows her intentions and doesn't want to be disqualified for ignoring administrator's warning. Riley says that's a lie and she's just running away because she's going to lose. So Rebecca says they'll meet again in the exam. She's met all sorts of crazy candidates before, and it has been fun. Riley agrees since she got some good information. Rebecca says goodbye, telling her to take care until the exam because she sincerely had a really fun time that day. Riley thinks that it was indeed a clone. The protagonist says the real body was probably on the other side of Wilhelm. There was a strange flow of mana that can't flow in ordinary beings. If it weren't for someone as sensitive to mana as Riley, he wouldn't have noticed. Riley says she now understands why Becky was interested in her. It was out of curiosity, wondering when this girl would realize she's a clone, and what kind of expression she would make upon finding out while subtly waiting to be discovered as the monoflow grew stronger. The protagonist asks why she would do something like that, asking how she finds this fun. Riley says it's about enjoying the thrill of almost being discovered. The protagonist says she's quite remarkable with that lunatic mentality. An administrator analyzes the report in his office, saying she took less than half a day to find the administration office. The fastest record had been 4 hours, and even that was the result of Rebecca Duncan using 20 clones to walk around Wilhelm. He reflects that the average time for those who passed the first test is about a week. Even Garen Edward von Theobald, who is at the high expert level, took a full day to find the administration office. So he says this means that this Riley girl was practically in first place. The other administrator says she was right that there will be a lot to see this year, then the other agrees that there will be many things. There was 1 week left until the second selection test. Riley had decided she would rest well. She started to adopt a more relaxed lifestyle, waking up late and going for breakfast, taking a nap, and then having lunch. The girl lies in bed after a relaxed dinner, and 3 days later, she got tired of resting. So the protagonist suggests a walk. The girl comes out of a store wearing new clothes, and the protagonist says she looked beautiful. Riley thinks that even though she bought very expensive clothes, she still had a lot of money left. Grim War replies that she was still using what she received from Renelma's. Then the girl notices a place nearby saying it was the Arcadia Central Library, and Grim War says it's a century-old building. It was probably the second largest after Ludimo's and is also the place with the largest number of stored magic books. Riley asks if she can go in, and the protagonist is hesitant. The girl says there's nothing else to do, and candidates can use the library without any procedures. So the protagonist says it was attractive. Exploring Arcadia would be a beneficial experience, and there are excellent tomes there. But he was still hesitant because he was trapped in that miserable place for 300 years. Countless of those damn books everywhere, whether on the shelf in front of him. To his side or behind him, there were only books. Riley says he can't avoid the library forever. The protagonist agrees, thinking that unlike the technology-filled Earth in this world, he can use books to acquire knowledge. As Riley said, avoiding the library forever is not an option, and he needs to overcome this trauma eventually. So he says they'll just close their eyes and go in. If it doesn't work once they're inside, he can always leave. Inside the library, the girl is surprised, looking up at the ceiling and saying it was incredibly beautiful. Grim War says it doesn't have that oppressive feeling of books squeezed in everywhere like in Renelma's, so it's fine, and it looked like Hogwarts. Riley says the access card she received was platinum, and the protagonist explains it was the highest level. The girl comments that there's only one destination then, heading to the restricted area of forbidden books. Grim War says the 2 books she picked up in the general section are fine, but the forbidden books are what really matter. Riley says there was a slightly brighter area over there, so the protagonist tells them to go that way. Until on the way they run into someone. Approaching them shortly after, the mage turns his back asking how she got there. Then he notices the magic symbol on Riley's wrist, recognizing that she was a participant too. Then he comments that it was impressive for her to pass the first mission by breaking all the distortion spells. Grim War complains about this old man showing up again, and he was very annoying, having advised Riley to give up the test. The girl comments that it will be fine now that she has the symbol for passing the first mission, but the old man says she should give up, because the exam will be much more brutal than she imagines, and the moment blood is spilled, this place will become a killing field. A mage with decades of experience might manage. But for someone like Riley, it will be very dangerous, so she should quit. But he notices that the girl didn't even respond. Riley thanked him for his sincere concern, but said she had already made up her mind. The old man said she was being reckless due to the thoughtless enthusiasm of her age. But Riley replied that some might even admire her courage. The old man called it nonsense, but the girl disagreed. The mage seemed a bit irritated by that. He said he would show her personally, then he suggested they have a duel right now. If she truly wanted to take the test, she would have to defeat him. But it was clear this wouldn't be a normal duel. He wouldn't attack Riley. Instead, he would give her 3 opportunities to hit him. And if he took a single step during that time, she would win. Then he wouldn't interfere with her anymore. And if she managed to land a valid blow on him, she would surely survive the test. Grimoire said he wasn't wrong, the old man standing before them. There were fewer than 50 of them on the entire continent, and he was one of them, a high-level expert mage. Among the test participants, he was by far the strongest. Landing a valid blow would be a fitting way to prove her skills. Riley asked what would happen if she couldn't land a valid blow. The old man said that although he didn't want to, he would have to stop her from taking the test because he would have to attack her for real. Grimoire noted that he had just said he wouldn't attack, calling him a crazy old man. Garen clarified he wouldn't take her life, just break both her legs so she couldn't take the test. They both thought this person was not normal. The old man asked why she was making that face, and the girl said her pride was hurt. The man asked if she wanted to duel on equal terms with no restrictions, and Riley agreed. Garen sighed, then called out to her. He then remembered something and asked her to get the book from his bag, the 100 Great Figures Who Shaped the Modern Empire. Garen took the book, and Grimoire asked why he was doing this. The mage flipped through the pages and said it was a very good book that didn't distort history much. Then he told her to read about this. Grimoire wondered why he was suddenly recommending a book. It was about number 67, Garen Edward von Theobald. He was a commander of the magical unit on the Western Front, known for holding off hundreds of demons by himself. This event is known as the Battle of the Hallspart Mountains, and the Emperor highly praised Garen's achievements, leading to his induction into the Hall of Fame. They both realized it was a picture of the old man. Not all high-level mages have the same skills. Some lock themselves in a room to train and level up, while others level up by fighting on blood-soaked battlefields. Among these high-level mages, there are individuals who are truly called giants, like Garen Theobald, who stood right in front of them. Riley was impressed. She wondered if she had gone too far, and Grimoire confirmed it. The girl asked if she could increase her attack opportunities to 5, and Garen asked if she had no shame. But by the way, this doesn't seem like a suitable space for a duel. Grimoire added that there were too many obstacles. Garen snapped his fingers, telling her not to worry. Magic created an opening in the library, modifying the space immediately. He pushed all the furniture aside, saying this space was enough, and she didn't need to worry about breaking anything with her magic as it wouldn't leak outside this barrier. Riley asked what if it did leak, and Garen said it would still be fine since the platinum-level facilities were treated against magic. Grimoire said that if he says so, then Riley should go ahead. He wondered if her attacks were effective against a high-level mage, noting it was a great opportunity to test it safely. He then reminded her that if she failed to land a valid blow, she'd get her legs broken, but added that she wasn't so weak that she couldn't hit him. Garen reflected that mages who reached the low-level rank before the age of 20 are often called geniuses. Every mage experiences 2 awakenings in their life. The first occurs at age 10. Those who instinctively grasp the truth of magic, mana, and the arcane are called apprentices and undergo training. Then the second awakening happens when they become adults, where the attributes seed in their mana heart blossoms, allowing for more sophisticated magic. Once they get used to the mana imbued with their attribute, mages surpass the apprentice level and enter the low-level rank. And that is why the abilities of adult mages grow exponentially. Mages naturally grow stronger as they age. On the other hand, those who surpass the apprentice rank before reaching adulthood, before their second awakening, are called monsters for that fact alone. He wanted to see the future of the girl before him. If he had let her take the test like this, she wouldn't have lasted long and would have lost her life, but he suddenly noticed he was paralyzed. However, it wasn't magic, but rather the terror one feels when facing the possibility of death. So he wondered what she did as Riley maintained a smile on her face and conjured her magic. Garen had crossed the line between life and death hundreds of times on the battlefield, and now he was feeling that same tension from a mere low-level girl. He wondered what the hell the problem could be until the magic missile hit his barrier. He thought his mana shield was disappearing, and that was the dispel spell. He then noticed the magic circle behind his back until a green crystal cut the magic missile in half. Riley was surprised by this as the crystal then fell at his feet. Grimoire said that he noticed and intercepted the missile before the shield was dispersed. Garen sighed, slightly out of breath. He wondered if this could be intentional. If she had purposefully launched a direct attack to make him lower his guard, it seemed her confidence didn't just come from youthful arrogance. He needed to keep an eye on her. Riley prepared another magic missile. She analyzed all the openings right after, and then she fired it at the man's shoulder. Garen felt the pressure of that magic. He intercepted it with his shield, sighing. He reflected that she was aiming precisely at the weakest part of his magic, something a low-level mage shouldn't be able to notice. Besides, he had moved. Although it was subtle, she had pushed him back. An exceptional affinity with mana, the ability to detect flaws in magic, and an understanding of techniques to exploit those weaknesses immediately. It was as if an experienced archmage was helping this girl. These were not the skills of an inexperienced youth, but rather of someone who easily overcomes rank differences. A genius. He had no choice but to acknowledge it. This girl will survive the selection test. Then he stomped his foot on the ground. Riley didn't understand his action, and she said she still had one more chance to attack. But Garen told her there was no need to continue since the outcome was already decided. Her second attack had pushed him back, so the victory in this duel was hers. As promised, he would no longer interfere, and he sincerely apologized for his presumptuous meddling. Riley said, however, that she already knew what he had just said because her second attack had been effective. Garen asked why she bothered to cast the next attack spell. The girl explained that he had said there were 3 chances to attack, so he should return to his defensive stance now because there were still things she wanted to confirm. Garen asked her to wait a moment. He reflected on her words about confirming something. Grimoire thought that the only attack magic Riley could use since she hadn't gone through the attribute awakening was magic missile. In standard magic, the only thing she could do was add variations through techniques, but that was fine. The way she used Dispel to create an opening and then launch a surprise attack was something even a high-level mage would find problematic. So it was still alright. A few moments passed and they left the room. Garen told her to keep this duel a secret. Riley remembered the administrator's warning to avoid conflicts between candidates. She said she didn't remember what he was talking about and had just been reading in Arcadia. Garen asked where she was staying, and Riley told him it was an inn recommended by someone she knew. It was called the Sky Whale Inn. Garen said the person who recommended it was not a good friend, and Riley asked why. The old man explained there were better accommodations in Wilhelm. He asked if her luggage was there, and the girl said everything was in her bag. Elsewhere, Garen asks if she mentioned meeting Rebecca Duncan. Riley says he seemed to know her, and Garen replies it would be strange if he didn't. He reminds her of what he said in the car the other day about how some people see the selection test as a true battlefield. Rebecca Duncan is exactly that kind of mage. Last year, she was disqualified for excessive killing. The year before that, she took the life of a test administrator. She suppresses her madness most of the time, but once a year, she unleashes her impulses through the selection test. Grimm says she's not called the killing maniac for nothing. Riley wonders why the 5 magic towers don't do anything about Becky. If she's so dangerous, they could just block her at registration. But Grimoire begins to explain. The 5 magic towers have a simple reason. They want to use Rebecca Duncan as a mechanism of the test. Imagine you encounter the famous killing maniac during the test. They want to see what you will do in the midst of such a desperate situation nearby in another part of the city. Says this is the location indicated by the magic circle. It seems to be the second test site. Grimoire comments that the exterior looks a lot like the selection tests administration office. Garen tells them they should go inside. He then opens the door, feeling a strong flow of mana surge toward her. Riley quickly shields her face with her hand. Meanwhile, Grimoire remains completely unfazed, thinking that this was a phenomenon he had experienced thousands of times, teleportation magic, which whisks a portion of the participants away. Riley wakes up shortly after. She's in a fancy room with several other mages. Grimoire notes that it's incredibly luxurious, looking like the interior of the Imperial Palace. Then he notices the symbol on the wall. He realizes it's the same palace he was just imagining, but it's not the one he knows as the structure is completely different from the Grand Hall of the Rita's Empire. Riley observes that the interior is quite old. Therefore, it was a castle ruin. Ruins are places where artifacts, treasures, and grimoires lie dormant. Typically, such ruins are protected by traps and guardians, classifying them as some of the most difficult dungeons to conquer. Grimoire says that choosing such a dangerous place as a test site is very typical of the selection test. Riley notices that Mr. Garen Theobald has disappeared. Grimoire points to where he was. Riley starts to go after him until someone approaches. Rebecca elbows her as she calls out, saying it was a surprise to meet again so soon. She asks how she's been and if she enjoyed her time on the Sky Whale, but Riley denies it. Rebecca asks why not, wondering if it wasn't as good as she thought. The protagonist gets irritated by this. She says she didn't even go to the Sky Whale in the first place. She just stayed at another lodging, having a pleasant 3 days at the Arplestingwood Grand Hotel. Grim Moore thinks that's a lie. They were tricked by Becky, so they only stayed there for 2 days. Suddenly, someone gets everyone's attention. An administrator greets the candidates, announcing that they will now guide them to the second test. Rebecca says she'll find her first when the test starts and make her regret that bold challenge from last time. Riley says she's sure of her victory. The mage turns away angrily and tells her to just wait and see, while Grim War asks why she doesn't just fight now if she wants to so badly. Later, the administrator announces that the second test is a team competition. A total of 42 candidates will form teams of 3 and compete against other teams. The team members will be assigned by the administration. They will have to cooperate on-site to navigate through the test gates. They are now given 30 minutes to get to know their team members, with Rebecca and Riley ending up on the same team as another girl. The older mage gets annoyed and the protagonist asks if she saw that, saying they'll have to save their fight for another time. Grim says this must be a dream. Riley complains that she's unhappy about being on the same team as Becky. The book asks if she realizes she's on the same team as a killing maniac. Riley says that at least Becky is screwed too. Grim War comments that she seems like an uncontrollable mage at first glance and can't imagine what kind of trouble she'll cause. The administrator asks if there are any other questions. Rebecca immediately gets her attention, and the administrator tells her to speak. She asks what happens if team members fight among themselves. The administrator replies that disagreements are natural, but they must move in the right direction. But Rebecca says that's not what she meant. She wants to know what happens if they just start casting spells at each other. The administrator is left speechless by this. The same thing happens in Garen's group. Grim War says this is bullshit. The administrator says that, as everyone might guess, the team competition is a test method that evaluates mutual cooperation. Therefore, if even one team member loses their life, the entire team will be disqualified. So they must keep that in mind. Rebecca is completely stunned by this, shouting that this is absurd. It was too extreme for everyone to be disqualified if one team member died. And others complained that the thing they hate most in the world is someone holding them back. The administrator looks coldly at everyone there. Then she orders them to be silent, and everyone does as she commands. Grim War says that with the aura of a high-level mage, silencing dozens of people is nothing. The administrator continues, saying they may have received special treatment just for being mages up until now. After all, mages are invaluable beings, and no one would have dared to say anything no matter how much trouble they caused. As a result of such conditions persisting for decades, their characters have naturally become distorted and their personalities destructive, but that will no longer be allowed. To enter the magic tower, they can no longer act as individuals, but as members of a group. That's why the second test is a team competition, to see how they cooperate with people they're meeting for the first time. If they aren't prepared to endure this, they should give up on the test right now. Rebecca screams that she hates this. Later, she says she doesn't really want to do this, but since it's come to this, she'll do her best. Riley agrees with her. Grim War thinks that seeing her hold back her anger like that, she must really want to pass the test. He thought she'd go crazy, but it seems she has some restraint. But on second thought, she was reluctant to be eliminated even during their first encounter. So she's not just a psychopath who enjoys taking lives. Riley thinks you never know. Could all be an act. Grimoire says that, anyway, the most important thing is about the other team member who was standing far away trying to call out to the other two. Rebecca asks what's wrong with her since she can't hear anything. Riley wonders if they weren't just together a moment ago. The girl approaches and says she likes ancient magic, but Rebecca tells her to start with her name. Olivia introduces herself, saying she's from the Arcane School of Flames. Rebecca immediately shouts the name, saying they're a bunch of idiots who only know ancient magic, and that's the absolute worst. Riley asks if ancient magic is really that bad, and Grimoire confirms it is. Starting with the name, it's a system of magic that was used in the past and is rarely used now. Riley says, so people who learn ancient magic and Grimoire finishes are idiots just chasing a romanticized notion. For example, erasing a mountain or splitting the sea in two. People who indulge in such nonsense are called myth-chasing idiots, and that's how they're treated. But he wonders how they're still around. He thought they disappeared 300 years ago. So you have an illusionist assassin with anger management issues, a socially inept ancient magic fanatic. And finally, there was Riley. He sarcastically complains that it's a fantastic team. A few moments later, Garen approaches calling for Riley. He asks how she's feeling as some people get nauseous the first time they teleport. Riley says she's fine and asks if Mr. Theobald got a good team. Garen replies that he's satisfied. Thanks to the first test, all the mages here are high quality. But he wants to ask about her team until Rebecca shouts that they're doomed. She demands to know why an idiot who only knows ancient magic came to the selection test. Riley complains that she was trying to keep her distance because of the noise. Garen said it was impressive to think Rebecca Duncan and a mage from the Arcane School of Flames were on the same team, and he wondered if it was bad luck or good fortune. Grimoire agreed. Regardless of her reputation, Rebecca was a strong mage. The problem was you never knew what she would do once the test started. You had to constantly watch your back, and it was hard to expect anything from ancient magic, which has little practical use. To make matters worse, she has no experience. In the end, he could only rely on Riley and Becky. While the others fight with 3, they only have 2. Riley commented that hearing it like that really made it sound hopeless. The protagonist wondered what he could do. He chose this selection test and had to endure it with resilience and determination. And they weren't the only ones dissatisfied. Not at all, as others were thinking the same thing they were. They had to overcome these thoughts, find their teammates' strengths, and cooperate. As a unit and as a team, that was the essence of the second test. Rebecca got irritated that it took Olivia a minute to say one sentence, and Grimoire said it was certainly irrational to expect teamwork. Garen announced he had to go now, relieved to see she wasn't nervous. Riley thanked him for that. Then the old man said his goodbyes. The girl wondered what that was all about since he just left, but she remembered that now they were competitors. Grim agreed with the girl. Riley thought that she wasn't worried as the months of training in the Lich's lair had been significant, and Grimoire continued that he was confident. Through this selection test, they would achieve the result they desired, and he was absolutely sure of it. The administrator asked if everyone had finished their introductions. This was the entrance to the ruins where the second test would take place, and now she would explain the rules. The interior of the ruins is a labyrinth, and they must find the treasures. The treasures look like this. She then showed a magical sphere. The item reproduced a projection. Rebecca asked what it was. A golem was emerging from it. The administrator said the test duration is 24 hours, and there are 2 conditions to pass. The first one was that they must possess the golden golem's core at the end of the test. And second, all team members must be alive by then. Grimoire said that, in short, it was like this. Find the golden golem, get its core, do it all as a team, and survive for 24 hours. As long as they were careful with the hidden traps and guardians, it wouldn't be dangerous. The administrator added that, by the way, there were only 3 golden golems. There were 42 candidates, meaning 14 teams. This meant only 3 could pass the test. Grimoire commented that it was a test with only a 20% approval rate, and there was no guarantee that all 3 golems would be found. Besides, they wanted to see a fierce competition for limited resources. Riley thought that was cruel, and the protagonist commented that the 5 great magic towers encourage competition among mages. To put it nicely, it's a meritocracy. But frankly, they just enjoy pitting them against each other. The administrator said that the most dangerous of the obstacles was the chimera that the administration carefully procured for this test, a high-risk creature designed solely for destruction and murder. Grim wondered why that sounded familiar. The administrator continued that some of them might already know the creature. 5 years ago, there was an incident where a lich invaded the Eastern Empire. These were the same chimeras that attacked the citizens back then. Grimoire grew furious with that damn skeleton. The administrator continued that once they passed through this portal, they would be teleported to a random location with their team. It wouldn't be easy, but if they passed the test, they would enjoy the glory of the 5 great magic towers. Now they must enter the ruins as the second test begins now. Grimoire complained that he had somehow ended up becoming the brains behind everything. But besides that, the palace was huge, and Riley agreed. Grimoire continued that it felt like they were dwarves visiting a giant's palace, but suddenly, a pressure hit him. Footsteps approached the group. Rebecca wondered what was happening. A giant guardian with a halberd in its hands walked past them. Riley wondered if she had mentioned anything like this, and the protagonist repeated that they said there would be obstacles. This statue must be one of them, and it's not something they released for them to fight. Riley said it's like entering a restricted area. Find the golden golem and avoid these monsters. Grimoire agreed that the statue was like a red zone. His instincts honed over thousands of years were screaming not to touch that statue. It would take at least 3 or 4 Theobalds to even try. So he wondered who in their right mind would provoke that thing. But Rebecca called out to Riley asking what she was doing because they had to fight this monster now. Grim War yelled for Riley to stop her immediately. The girl asked Becky to wait while the mage asked when she would get another opportunity for such a magnificent battle. Riley asked Olivia to help hold her back while Rebecca kept repeating for them to let her go. The protagonist commented that they don't even know how strong this monster is, and Rebecca said they'll find out by fighting. Riley continued that if they recklessly charge in, they'll lose their lives, and if they win, they'll gain nothing. Rebecca asked what she meant by nothing to gain because there was the thrill. Grim Moore was impressed by that, and he wondered what the hell she was talking about now. Rebecca continued that a fierce battle with a strong monster and hitting its weak spot with a critical blow is a feeling everyone loves, and she should know that. Grim War said that no sane mage would challenge that monster unless they were a battle maniac like Becky. Riley agreed. Then another group approached, saying they were going to fight the strong statue. Riley commented that there are other battle maniacs like Rebecca, and Grim War asked why everyone was like this. Rebecca shouted for them to let go because they were going to lose this chance. Then Riley got her attention and told her to look ahead. Rebecca turned around. She saw the mages casting spells to turn the statue to dust. One of them launched a magic sphere at it. The attack approached the statue, but it split apart right after. The mage wondered how it didn't move after taking his ultimate attack, but he was shocked a moment later. The statue's foot came down on them, and it took the man's life with a single stomp. Everyone ran in a panic from all this, but the statue readied its halberd. All 3 in the group were shocked. Rebecca asked how about they look for the golden golem. And Riley said that sounded like a good idea. Riley placed her hands on the ground, infusing her mana. She then analyzed the area, but she commented that it's very difficult to spread her mana and wondered if all dungeons were like this. Grim War replied that this place was unusual. The ruins are among the most dangerous dungeons, which means the difficulty level is naturally high. But no matter how we looked at it, this was a bit of an overkill. There was all sorts of mana interference, perception obstruction, and even forgotten ancient spells camouflaged in here. Normally, using search magic would be impossible, but he wanted to know how long Riley thought she needed. The girl said at least 5 minutes, but she could finish in 3 if she was quick. For a mage, the restriction on mana dispersion is like being blindfolded. It's impossible not to get frustrated, but Riley was her usual self, unlike Rebecca, who was annoyed by the difficulty. So she asked if Olivia couldn't think of a good method since they needed to find the golden golem but couldn't use search magic. The girl said she was sorry and there was nothing useful in the ancient magic she knew. Rebecca questioned if she couldn't even use basic search magic. Even without combat experience, she should at least be useful with utility magic. Now she was completely useless, telling her to raise one of her hands and now use that hand to hit her head hard. Grim thought she was making her do that again. Olivia had an idea right after, asking if they could use Becky's clones just like she did in the first test. Grim War thought he had heard about that, so Olivia asked what she thought. Grim War thought it was a reasonable idea. If they explored the ruins with several clones, finding the golden golem would just be a matter of time, but that was only in theory. Rebecca sighed and formed a clone. Supposing she sent them all throughout the ruins as she suggested, they would collect a lot of information since their senses and vision were shared, and it would be like having surveillance crystals. But she knew what. This only works if the clones remain intact. Then she grabs the clone's neck, saying she can't avoid the dungeon's traps while managing dozens of clones, and that some will inevitably run into monsters. Managing clones consumes a huge amount of mana. If all the clones die and her mana runs out, they could encounter enemies. And now she should understand why you don't use clones for reconnaissance. So Rebecca sighs, even more annoyed. She asks if Riley has a better idea as she's already frustrated with Olivia, but the girl announces that she's finished. Suddenly, mana illuminates Rebecca's face. Riley's mana forms layers of a labyrinth in front of her, concentrating into a simple map of the dungeon. Rebecca asks what it is since it's not any search magic she knows. Riley insists that it is. Grim War says it was worth modifying for half a year, and at this point it should be called a completely surprising spell. He then asks if Riley is good at naming things and if she wants to give it a try. Riley decides to call it the Riley-style Ultra Super Mega Search Bow. The group continues walking through the dungeon. Riley tells them to wait for a moment. Arrows fly toward them. Riley warns that it was a trap. Olivia asked how many times that has been, and Riley says it's the 30th. Rebecca then asked how she avoids traps so well, saying she's almost like someone from the Thieves' Guild. Riley asks if she's seen anyone from there recently, and Rebecca denies it, saying it was just a figure of speech. Grim War thinks that other mages would have cast defensive spells each time or surrounded themselves with a constantly activated mana shield, but that would drain their mana. And if they encountered monsters in that state, they would surely meet a terrible end. Olivia screams when she sees the body on the floor, but Rebecca tells her not to make a scene since she has eyes too. Judging by the wound, it seems they were attacked by hound-type monsters and had their mana depleted after passing through a trap area. Thanks to Riley, they passed through the trapped areas without spending any mana, and she acknowledges her skills. Riley asks if she can't just say thank you, and Rebecca asks why she has to ruin the moment. Then Riley complains about everything she did. Rebecca says she was the one who called her a pathetic mage first, and Riley says it's true. So the other dares her to a fight. Olivia trembles with anger as they argue, shouting for them both to please stop. Rebecca turns toward her. Olivia asks why they're doing this in front of the lifeless bodies. But the mage grabs her hand and asks why she's getting involved unnecessarily too. Olivia questions if she doesn't feel sorry for them. Rebecca says this is why amateurs are frustrating, as there's a reason they can't touch those bodies. That shiny mucus is a hound's saliva. In other words, monster saliva. They have an excellent sense of smell and can track their own trails very well. Olivia says she's sorry, but Rebecca just tells her to be more cautious. Riley says she thought Rebecca would let her touch the hound's tracks. Rebecca asks if she's crazy since she values her life. Riley continues that she was ready to fight the giant, but the mage says that's different. Hounds are just useless trash. She only fights opponents on her level, and that's her belief. Just then, they come face to face with two mages. She says this is her first battle, and as expected, they need to be at least a mage for her to want to fight. But Olivia tells her to wait a minute since there was something behind the two mages. The two mages panic at this. One of them says she doesn't see anything and wants to know what the hell is attacking them. Then she's split in half and her colleague loses a hand. Olivia's mouth is covered by Rebecca, while Riley and Grim hide together. The protagonist says this test is cruel and watching it makes him want to vomit. Rebecca tells him not to puke, saying if he throws up, he'll lose his life. Riley then bets that Olivia will vomit first. Grim War questions if Riley wants to try fighting this invisible chimera. Riley analyzes the monster that was there, watching it open its mouth, then she thinks a little more. She wonders if she should try since there's no one around to interfere. Besides, that monster had something. As it continues to eat, its body gradually becomes visible. The protagonist agrees and says it's about time to stretch a little. The girl breaks into a smile and tells Becky she can stop hiding now. She had said she wanted an exciting fight and now seems like the perfect opportunity. Rebecca looks at her surprised. Then she says that now she's speaking her language, standing in front of the monster that was sitting in the corner. Grim War says they should go and Riley agrees, preparing a magic missile. The monster tries to advance toward them, but its mouth is hit by the magic. Riley says something is coming, then the mana begins to disperse from its mouth. Riley starts to form her mental search labyrinth and uses her dispel spell magic. The monster roars in anger before attacking them. Riley says it looks a bit pathetic. Grim War asks what's pathetic about it, wondering if it's because its desperate attack was blocked by a simple dispel. Riley says that people say you shouldn't bother a dog while it's eating. Rebecca then calls out to Riley saying she's very good and impressive for a kid. There's no hesitation in her movements. The monster then eats a clone of Rebecca. But in reality, she rises above it, warning that it's still far from her level. Riley asks if she really had to add such a childish comment. The monster opens its mouth to attack Rebecca once more, but the girl dodges, asking if it can't even handle this. And if its eyes work properly, since its body is in pieces, the creature gets more irritated, and Riley wonders if they should finish this now. She then calls for Becky at her side. Both prepare magic spheres in their hands, launching them toward the creature right after. The monster starts to panic until it's pierced by the magic missiles. Rebecca says that was too easy. While Olivia trembles in fear, she tells her to get up since it's over and shouts once more for her to listen. Olivia sighs and Rebecca tells her to cool her head. Grim More thinks she takes good care of Olivia and Riley agrees. From what she's observed, this is Becky's way of showing consideration. She didn't seem to have an evil nature and, in fact, isn't the murderer they thought she was. But, of course, she's still an eccentric mage who is aggressive enough to provoke a fight at their first meeting, and she sometimes does crazy things without hesitation. But thinking about it, she acts just like her Riley. So her conclusion about Rebecca is that she's not someone who takes lives for pleasure. Riley wonders what the warning Garen Theobald mentioned last night was about. It bothers her, but since they'll be together during the second test, she'll naturally discover the truth behind the rumors. Later, Olivia asks the Great Mother of Magic to care for the lives of those who lost their souls and for the Goddess of Duties to gather their spirits. Then she sighs, saying it's done. Rebecca wonders why she'd bother with such a troublesome ritual. Olivia explains that it was to honor those who lost their lives, and this was because ancient magic has a strange concept, and she begins to ramble. Grim War complains that it's a rule of the Arcane Flame School. Riley says she has a question besides that. She had said before that there is no tracking magic in ancient magic, so she wants to know something. How did she pass the first test? And how had she found the administration office to pass the test? Rebecca agrees, calling her an idiot and wanting to know how she did it. In truth, all Olivia can do is show off her little knowledge of ancient magic. The girl forces a smile, saying there's no rule that she has to find the office by herself. She asked a mage from a guild specializing in tracking to find the administration office for her. Olivia says she hates to say it, but she's a genius. She knows ancient magic better than anyone and should get into the magic towers because they'll love her. There's no one in this world like her, but she just couldn't find the administration office on her own. And when she asked others, they said they didn't know either. But just because she can't use tracking, it's unfair for a genius like her to fail the test. She desperately begged a mage who had just finished the first test, and Grimoire comments that she tried to take others' power to prove her own. Olivia continues, saying they didn't help her, and the protagonist shouts that, of course, they wouldn't. The girl goes on, saying that even though she asked politely, they treated her like she was crazy and refused to help. Grimoire says he would have done the same. And the more he hears, the less he understands how she passed. Olivia says that, reluctantly, she used suffering magic. There are some terrible spells within ancient magic, and what she does best is suffering magic. The mage, in agony, begged her to stop, promising he would do it. Rebecca says it's unbelievable the administrator accepted this. Olivia says she found the administration office with her own skills. The mage laughs, saying, "So? A psychopath like her talks about respect for those who lost their lives and all that." Olivia asks what that has to do with anything, and Rebecca laughs even harder, saying that this girl is a real psycho too. Grim wonders how there's no one sane there. A few moments later, the girls move forward. 12 hours pass in the second test, and not a single golem core has been obtained. Grim more asks if it was still running away, and Riley confirms. The test's condition is to find the core of a golden golem, and to get it, you need to capture the golem. The problem is that even if you find it, it runs away while avoiding traps. That's why they haven't been able to capture a golden golem for half a day. Rebecca says catching a golem is ridiculously difficult. Riley says she has good news since the two nearby golems have stopped moving completely. Two mages say they finally got the golden golem core while thinking that Garen did it practically by himself, the living legend of magic. The one who kept hundreds of demons at bay in the Hallspart Mountains, and it's a blessing they teamed up. But it was pointless to think about such things, and he calls out to Theobald. Now that they found the golden core, they should take a break. Garen says that even if he wanted to, there's no time for that. After all, there's something he wants to ask Arpel about, the fact that he hasn't asked a single question since entering this place. Arpel had none, and Garen asks him to hand over the golem core. It has a very peculiar magical power, and I've never encountered this type in my life. Besides, it was probably specially made by the 5 Great Towers for this test. But he wants to know why they spent half a day searching for a core with such strong magical power. Even though all the ruins are covered in magical interference, it makes no sense that they couldn't detect such a unique magical power. And Arpel says, strange. Arpel Stingwood is a skilled mage who reached the upper middle level at 29. As the second son of the family, he has always followed an elitist path. It makes no sense that he couldn't detect such a strong magical power, especially when even Theobald had trouble tracking the core's magic. Garen says it was just one of the intentional tricks from the 5 Great Magic Towers and that he should look at this, telling him to look at the dragon skin on the core, and judging by the engravings, it seemed to have been enchanted. Dragon skin has excellent anti-magic properties, making it undetectable by most magical detection. That's why they had difficulty. Arpel says that's impossible and questions why the 5 Great Magic Towers would use such a precious skin just for a selection test. Garen asks if he doesn't understand what this test means in the world of magic, and the young man laughs. But the old man continues, saying he has one more question anyway. As he knows, There are 42 candidates waiting in these ruins. He doesn't know how many are left. But since they all passed the first test, they must be skilled. But now that the core hidden by the dragon skin has been exposed, he wants to know what will happen. Arpel says it means they're going to be attacked. Garen says that from the beginning, this test wasn't about finding the cores. As he speaks, several mages gather around them. The team that finds the golem first will be relatively skilled. But the moment that team removes the core, Arpel says it's many against one and it's part of the Five Towers plan. But he wonders if they'll flee or fight and what several teams facing one enemy will do and whether they'll unite or compete against each other. But then he notices something strange, asking why he removed the golem's core if he knew this. He could have just left the body and core until the test was over. Garen says that since they're going to fight eventually, it would be better to finish them all at once. Everyone advances toward him. Garen just touches his staff to the ground. Mana begins to flood out as if from a puddle, then it flies out towards them, sucking the breath from every mage around him, a spell they can't possibly survive. Suddenly, they are thrown far away thanks to Theobald's wind magic. Garen looks at them without reaction. The girl says the old man is incredible for using the traps set up by the great magic towers, but she tells Arpel and Dorothy to get ready. Because if they join forces, they can easily handle about 10 weaklings. Elsewhere, Rebecca calls out to Riley, asking if she feels that too. Because it's definitely the power of a golden golem core, and they need to get there fast. But Riley immediately refuses. Rebecca says it's far away, and by the time they get there, the situation will already be resolved. They can just infiltrate and attack the team that got the core. Riley questions if she thinks only their team would think of that, and that by the time they get there, the other teams will already be there. Rebecca says that's what they should do because if they don't hurry there, Riley says that while everyone's attention is focused there, they'll just grab the other golden golem core since there's another golem in this area. Rebecca says if they do that, Riley asks if she's ever regretted following her advice. So the mage decides to go anyway. Grimoire thinks that the other candidates aren't as good at tracking as Riley unless they have a high magical affinity to break through the magical interference. But there were at most 3 or 4 capable of that. Riley thinks that the other candidates could only find a golden golem by luck, and Grimoire says he thought the exam administrator had gone crazy. But at that moment, the core that had been silent all this time suddenly began to emanate a powerful energy, and naturally, all the candidates run until an explosion can be heard in the distance. Grimoire says the chaos has begun to unfold, and it must be one of the candidates prepared by the 5 great magic towers to force the others to fight. Riley remains silent at this, wondering if someone could have done this on purpose. Riley thinks that if someone amplified the core's magic to reduce the number of competitors, then it could mean something. And so the two look at each other. Grimoire wonders who would be crazy enough to do that, and Riley says no one. Garen thinks his ears are itching. The group continues walking without stopping. Rebecca complains that while some are probably fighting, they are just walking around peacefully, and she's bored out of her mind. Olivia tells her to hang in there a little longer as they'll find it soon. The mage then thinks of something, asking why Olivia chose ancient magic out of all the branches. Olivia wants to know why the sudden question, and Rebecca tells her to talk about something to cure her boredom. Ancient magic is practically the most unpopular branch and has no practical use, so other mages look down on it. Olivia considers the answer for a few seconds. Riley says that Becky is also part of the illusion branch of the Dolores School, and Rebecca says their situations are the same. She can handle other basic magic, but Olivia only knows ancient magic, which makes her a somewhat flawed mage. Grimoire thinks that's true, and Olivia was totally focused on ancient magic. As a result, she couldn't even properly use basic mana detection. Rebecca says there must be a reason for her to focus only on ancient magic, neglecting other branches. Olivia says she simply thought the stories she heard as a child were really cool. The legends about the great forgotten mages, Nirov of the Sky, Sage Mortem, and so on. Becky must know that the great forgotten archmages are incredible, and she must have read those stories too. In the story Tale of the Knife, moving a mountain with magic, or splitting the sea in two, Rebecca says that's just a fairy tale. Olivia wonders about that. Rebecca tells her to be serious because even if the Archmage Marta Farhirik were reincarnated, that wouldn't be possible. Olivia says it's not just fairy tales and that it really happened because there are historical records and academic materials. But Rebecca asks why no one at her school has ever done it. If what she says is true, she should be able to prove it with ancient magic, and no one would look down on her. So Olivia says if they just continue their research a little longer, but the mage keeps saying she's just genuinely worried about her, the path of magic, a path others want to walk but can't, and you're going to waste it researching fairy tale illusions. She asks if there's anything more to that ridiculous suffering magic, and Olivia apologizes for it. Rebecca tells her to just face reality since she used to be just like her. There was a time when she thought that if she mastered illusion magic, she would become strong. She looks to the side with regret. She tells her not to take it too seriously for her own good. Olivia thanks her for the advice. A few moments later, the group continues on their way. Riley then calls out to Grimoire. She wants to know if he's aware of it or not. She wants to know who was right, if the ancient magic from fairy tales really existed. Grimoire explains that Olivia is right and ancient magic did exist. With a single spell, mountains were erased, seas were parted in two, and entire enemy armies were annihilated. These feats, achieved by him and his disciples, turned into legends that are now dismissed as fairy tales. Riley wonders that if these things really happened, why did people forget about them? Grimoire explains it's the frightening power of time, something she should have learned about at the academy since magic is deeply related to the flow of history. Time passes for hundreds of years and then hundreds more. A long time ago, the Age of Wars came to an end. The Empire, supported by powerful archmages, unified the continent. Then the Emperor who unified the continent named the nation the Rita's Empire and declared peace across the land. But at the same time, destructive firepower lost its usefulness. Riley says it's because war mages aren't needed in times of peace. Grimoire agrees, explaining that the Empire sent mages to research labs because it was better to study magical engineering to improve people's lives. Dealing with the dungeons that were neglected during the war was also important, so to conquer them efficiently, new magic had to be developed. Magic with great firepower was excellent for annihilating enemies. But if you use that kind of magic in a dungeon, the ceiling will collapse and everyone will die just as it had happened in his past. Riley looks down, a little tense. He continues that, for the sake of safety and efficiency, magic changed. Pathfinding magic was developed to help with dungeon conquest. Meanwhile, powerful magic with a limited destructive range and high precision became dominant, and that's how the modern magic system developed. On the other hand, magic with great firepower lost its usefulness and became ancient magic. To put it mildly, it's traditional and outdated. As the Empire stabilized, some people became interested in ancient magic, but the gap in history had already grown too large. Legends became myths, myths became fairy tales, and fairy tales became illusions. No one remembers the legends that truly existed. Riley asks if he still remembers how to use ancient magic. Grimoire confirms he does, but it has no use anymore. The girl clutches the notebook to her chest, saying she has to learn. Grimoire questions her reaction as ancient magic has had no use since the war ended. Riley thinks that if a war were to break out again, ancient magic would become useful once more. He says she can't just learn it. For an effective invocation, she'd need to study ancient runes and memorize various incantations. On top of that, she would have to transform the circuits engraved on her body and restart everything she's worked on so far. Naturally, she wouldn't be able to use the magic she has learned and would have to reset her greatest strength, her mana affinity, back to 0. Riley says she doesn't like the sound of that. It seems she'll have to learn ancient magic in her next life. Grimoire smiles at her then, thinking that's if there even is a next life. Sometime later, a group is sitting down. A golden golem is tied up in fishing lines. Rebecca says it's good they finally found it, but Riley points out there's another team. Grimoire says that judging by their weary looks, the operation must have been very difficult. Rebecca notes that those guys subdued the golem but didn't take out its core. The creature keeps grunting non-stop. The mage says he'll make it quiet down. Riley wonders why they went to the trouble of capturing a golem alive when they could have just killed it and taken the core, and Grimoire wonders the same thing. Then he notices something. He says that it's dragon skin. Riley realizes that's why the core's magical power is weak, and Grimoire says he now understands. The moment they remove the core, it will reveal its presence. Riley thinks that others will sense the power and rush over, so they captured the golem before the test ended. He says they're really clever, but she needs to be careful with them since considering they didn't fall for any traps on the way, they're quite skilled. A few moments later, Rebecca summarizes that they're strong, so they should be careful when fighting them. Riley agrees since that's basically the gist of it. Rebecca says she's going to fight strong guys, something she's always done. So she moves to the front of the group, shouting for them to come at her all at once. That group is surprised by the sudden intrusion. Rebecca prepares her magic missile. The man steps in front of his group. The mage laughs hysterically, magic in her hands. But the man falls to the ground and surrenders. Rebecca is perplexed and asks if he's kidding, telling him they should hurry up and fight. His two subordinates want to know what he's doing. The guild leader shouts at them to shut up and lower their heads. They all lower their heads without even arguing. Rebecca wants to know why they surrendered without even fighting if they're supposed to be strong. Riley wonders if it could be because of Becky, since her fame is well known in the Maximum world, and they might have surrendered after seeing her face. The man continues to beg for them to spare him. Please, then he shouts Olivia's name. He says they'll surrender willingly, but please, she mustn't use suffering magic. Olivia reveals he was the one who helped her pass the first test, remembering her explanation of how it happened. Everyone is completely shocked by this. Riley pets the golden creature, which looks like a cub to him, but Grimoire compares it to a sphinx cat. Then Rebecca approaches, finding the creature cute, and asks to pet it too. But as she tries to touch it, the creature bites Rebecca's hand, and she screams that she's been bitten and is bleeding. Riley then asks if she's okay, and Rebecca furiously denies it. He observes the chaotic team, but concludes that at least they got the golden golem without a fight. Grimoire notices that Rebecca, who loves to fight, is unsatisfied, and the girl calls Olivia an idiot. Rebecca questions her about her talent for torture magic since the enemy leader chickened out, and Olivia replies that she trained hard because it's her only ancient magic. At this, Rebecca finds it odd and asks why she was trembling before, since she could have used that magic. Olivia then explains that torture magic has a 1-month cooldown, complaining that ancient magics always have flaws. Rebecca calls her crazy, but Grimoire comments that he's not sure who's calling whom crazy here. Changing the subject, Rebecca asks Olivia if she's from the southern region, which surprises her. She explains it's obvious from Olivia's southern accent when she panics, and Grimoire confirms it, leading Riley to ask why. Grimoire states that the South has a lot of crazy people and that the most eccentric ones usually come from there. Riley immediately asks him if that isn't regional discrimination. Grimoire defends himself, saying it's data from thousands of years, but Riley glares at him, disappointed by his morally wrong statements. Grimoire asks since when he cares about morals, while Riley just finds the situation interesting. Suddenly, Rebecca announces she's also from the South. Olivia celebrates the fact they're from the same place, while Riley and Grim watch from the background. At this, Riley comments that the southern region has a lot of crazies, and Grimoire scolds him for repeating the very thing he had criticized. He pretends not to remember, and Grimoire calls him shameless, sarcastically mentioning fairy tales like Pinocchio. Riley first confirms the story, but then reveals it's a joke, leaving Grimoire shocked that he believed something made up. He then reveals that the only tales he read as a child were about thieves, which confuses Grimoire. Riley explains that his uncle Robert wrote the tales for him, and Grimoire asks who this uncle is. The mention of the name brings back a memory for Riley. He remembers a figure amidst the flames screaming for him to run. Riley says his uncle was from a thieves' guild and that the stories taught selfish lessons, making Grimoire understand why he is the way he is. 20 hours pass inside the ruins, and the group looks exhausted with only 4 hours left until the test ends. Riley checks a panel and reports that no other candidates are approaching their location. Yawning, Riley comments on the long day, and Grimoire agrees they just need to hang on a little longer. With 4 hours left, Grimoire believes the tedious test will soon be over and that they'll pass without any problems. But suddenly, Grimoire and Riley go on alert. Just then, a powerful spell is launched in their direction, and the attack rushes swiftly down the corridor. Riley then focuses energy in his hand. He casts a dispel spell against the enemy magic. Thus, he completes his earlier thought, saying they would have passed if it weren't for those attackers. Rebecca and Olivia look at the scene, not understanding what happened. Next, Rebecca asks him why he didn't warn them someone was coming. He replies that his tracking magic didn't detect any presence. But Rebecca finds this ridiculous and asks how it's possible he didn't detect them. His affinity with mana is unparalleled, even allowing him to identify traps from the 5 great magic towers. Moreover, he can use his tracking even in ruins with strong mana interference. Grimoire notes that Rebecca knows this, which is why the situation makes no sense to her. So he supposes this would only be possible if the enemies were using something like dragon skin. At that moment, 3 hooded figures appear, and Grimoire realizes his assumption was correct. Grimoire faces the hooded figures and comments that they're not holding back. Riley then deduces that since they have the item, they must already have a golem, and questions why they would be attacked. Grimoire admits he doesn't know the answer, stating he only has uncertain hypotheses for now. But he concludes that one thing is certain: the enemies are dangerous. Furthermore, the enemy's concentration, speed, and precision in magic overwhelmingly surpass Riley's level. Riley then asks Grimoire if he can feel it too, as the mana seems familiar to him. Grimoire confirms but adds that his hypothesis about it is quite sinister. He begins to explain that the person who attacked them is the same one now manipulating two different mana spheres. The two then face off, each preparing their own spell. Suddenly, thin beams of mana cross the entire room. Grimoire identifies the technique as reconnaissance magic. He explains it's a subtle battle to gauge the opponent's level as mana holds its user's signature. Mana forms a unique wavelength. For a mage who seeks speed like Riley, it flows quickly. For a mage focused on destruction like Rebecca, mana manifests violently. And for a mage like Olivia who seeks precision, mana manifests in a clean and orderly way. As for a mage who brings death, the mana carries a dense killing intent. With this, it's possible to predict enemy movements and map the course of the battle. That is the function of reconnaissance. Then the hooded man says it's been a while. Riley replies that he didn't expect to meet him like this. The familiar mana is followed by an equally familiar voice. Grimoire then wonders why of all people it had to be him. At this, the man reveals himself as Garan Theobald and regrets having to face him as an enemy. He then asks if he came to get the core, but Garan denies it, showing he already has a core in his hand. Riley asks why, and Garan reminds him of something he'd told him before. He explains that the test attracts mages with various purposes, including some who use it as a killing field, and that he also has his own objective. Riley then asks what that purpose would be. Garan reveals that his objective is to kill Rebecca Duncan. Garan claims to have a personal grudge against that unhinged killer, while Rebecca stares at him seriously. He argues that letting Rebecca live will only bring more tragedy to the world of magic. Then, they are reminded of the test's rule. If one team member dies, everyone is disqualified. Riley warns him that if he kills Rebecca, he'll be disqualified too. But Garan simply replies that's why he regrets things have come to this. Riley glares at him coldly. Then Rebecca steps forward asking Riley to let her handle the old man as she has unfinished business with him too. But Grimoire intervenes saying they don't stand a chance against Garan Theobald. He explains the reason is a mismatch of fighting styles. Riley's combat style is erratic, using magic missiles and the Dispel spell to exploit weaknesses. On the other hand, Garen's magic is purely defensive with no weaknesses to exploit. Grimoire concludes that Garan Theobald is the worst opponent they could possibly face. He then suggests it would be better to fight the other two companions. Riley remains silent, his hand still glowing. He holds it, warning that it won't be easy. But Rebecca says she already knows, as he is an experienced mage. But Rebecca reminds him that, as she told him before, she only fights opponents at her level. She then declares that the perfect opponent is right there in front of her and questions why she wouldn't face him. Garan watches the scene in silence. He then warns his companions, Dorothy and Arpel, to be careful as the mage they are about to face will not be an easy opponent. Dorothy, however, scoffs at the fool who only knows ancient magic and the other girl who's just pretty. She interrupts, confused, and asks the old man to wait a second. She questions if her eyes are deceiving her as the girl looks like a rookie, and Garan confirms that she is. Dorothy gets worked up, not understanding how a rookie could take the test, but Garan scolds her for judging others solely by their level. He then asks Arpel to look after Dorothy, and the young man agrees while she remains irritated. Still, she sighs and concludes that her task is simply to take down the two opponents. Garan warns her not to let her guard down, and she agrees as she prepares her magic with her feet. Her foot strikes the ground, activating a shadow spell. The magic then surges forward and envelopes them. The three of them stand still as the shadow magic completely surrounds them. Then they use the elemental shadow magic, Shadow Transport, to disappear from the spot. Garen's feet remain planted firmly on the ground. He then states that now it's just the two of them and calls her by her name, Rebecca Duncan. Rebecca then smiles. She gives a bow and says she is honored to face the legendary Garan Theobald. At this, Garan steps closer and mentions the name Sharon. Rebecca continues, explaining that Sharon told her a lot about him. She adds that because of Sharon's stories, she already feels familiar with him even without ever having met him. Garan then clenches his teeth and repeats her name. He orders Rebecca not to mention his granddaughter's name with her filthy mouth. Next, a vision shows a girl in a magic circle begging for something. She keeps asking for help repeatedly. The vision ends with a scene of blood. Riley blinks, and the scenery changes completely. He and Grimm appear in a new place, which Riley describes as a greenhouse for giants. Grimoire notes that the place looks like it's been abandoned for a while and asks if only the two of them were transported there. Grimoire is startled to hear Olivia and admits he hadn't even noticed her presence. Then, the golden golem suddenly emerges from among the plants. Grimoire is relieved to see that the golem, Toby, is also there, as it would be bad to lose him. He then wonders why they were moved to this specific location. The magic used was shadow transport, a powerful spell with several limitations. The main one being its enormous energy cost. Using so much energy just to separate them is a huge risk, so there must be another reason. One possibility is that this location offers some strategic advantage to the enemies. Riley analyzes the environment and notes that the plants obstruct their view, concluding that the place is not suitable for a battle. But Grimoire agrees, reminding him that they must consider special circumstances since their opponent is also a mage. He then wonders why they would choose a place that also impairs their own vision. Suddenly, Grimoire seems to have a revelation about the reason. Just then, their opponents, Dorothy and Arpel, appear walking through the plants. Arpel comments to Dorothy that he still doesn't understand the strategy. He questions why Garen gave up the chance for an ambush, and Dorothy Griard, an advanced dark mage, replies that it wouldn't be fair. Arpel scoffs at the idea of fighting fairly as if they were knights and says that what he really doesn't understand is something else. Olivia then mutters that she has to go all out against a coward. Dorothy glares at her and complains about having to fight a rookie girl, questioning Garen's warning. Arpel advises her not to let her guard down, but she sighs and asks Riley if he doesn't also find the situation unfair. She then calls Olivia a coward and asks if Riley thinks he can face them alone, and he admits the situation is unfavorable. At this, Grimoire concludes that Rebecca is as good as dead since Garen fights with everything he's got, and it will be difficult for her to handle an experienced mage alone. The situation becomes a race against time where Riley needs to defeat them before Rebecca dies and the team is disqualified. He asks if he can do it, but Grimoire replies that the chances are slim as their opponents seem to be advanced mages. Riley remains silent. Arpel states that they don't want an unnecessary fight, but warns that if they insist, he won't hesitate as he prepares a spell. His energy then begins to crack the ground, and thick vines sprout aggressively from the soil. Suddenly, carnivorous plants attack them, and Arpel declares that just as the old man warned, they're not going to go easy on them. Riley understands that was the reason they were transported to the garden. Then, Arpel Stingwood reveals himself to be an advanced earth mage. He explains that he inherited his vision magic from the great sorcerer, Cromwell Stingwood. Riley recognizes the name as a shadow rushes toward him. A foot then stomps on the ground, activating a shadow magic. He turns around in surprise. Just then, he is thrown back by an explosion. As he falls, he realizes there are enemies everywhere, above and below. Then he lands hard on the ground as vines are controlled from a distance. Dorothy comments that fighting a low-level mage hurts their pride. She then warns him that playtime is over and advises him to give up now. Grimoire remarks on the enemy's combination of carnivorous plants and shadows. Riley then asks Grimoire what he thinks of the situation. He asks if Grimoire thinks they can beat them. The battle is a major disadvantage, with Riley facing two advanced mages on terrain that favors them. However, Grimoire, with his vast experience, claims that victory is possible. Grimoire quotes a book from his homeland that says, "When you know the enemy, you need not fear the result of 100 battles." Then he asks Riley which target is the priority, and he points to the man controlling the plants. Riley explains that since he's the main figure, if his plants disappear, the shadows the woman controls will also vanish. Grimoire proudly celebrates Riley's exact answer. He details how dangerous the man is, capable of using vines, poisonous mushrooms, and carnivorous plants to attack. But Grimoire raises a finger and poses a new question. He asks who taught plant magic to the great sorcerer Cromwell Stingwood. At that moment, the 5 great sorcerers are shown in a montage. Ian, Cedrian, Cromwell, Dimitri, and Martha. In a memory, Grimoire tells Riley they were considered talented geniuses, extremely passionate about magic. He, however, scoffs at the idea of them being geniuses and calls them a bunch of fools. But he admits their perseverance was unmatched. Back in the present, Riley says he's heard these stories countless times, and Grimoire replies that he should know then. About Cromwell Stingwood, a memory shows him asking the young mage what he likes. The young man is surprised by the sudden question. Then, Cromwell shows a small pot and excitedly declares that he likes plants. In the memory, Cromwell tells Grimoire he loves taking care of plants, and he just agrees. Then, Grimoire gets an idea. Back in the present, he suggests a type of magic and concludes that he knows enough about their opponent. Dorothy notices the smile and assumes they've already made a decision. At that, she demands the boy make a choice, fight or surrender. Riley then calls out to Grimoire and mentions a fairy tale that stuck with him about a con artist named Amy. Grimoire asks if it's another one of his uncle's stories, and Riley confirms. He then says he'll show them how the character from the tale pulled off her cons. He then sighs and simply tells them to take it. Dorothy and Arpel are confused by the offer. Then, Riley holds out his hand and offers them the golden golem. Dorothy is surprised as Garen swore they would fight. She comments that their team won't need the item anymore. Riley then remarks it would be crazy to fight them here, and Dorothy glares at him. Arpel agrees, saying an extra core can't hurt, and demands they hand over the golem. Riley pushes the golem toward them and tells it to stop hesitating. Dorothy approaches and calls the golem over, promising to take good care of it. At this, Grimoire has an idea and asks Riley what the con is. He explains that people aren't cautious with weaker things and that he'll use this psychology. Riley tells him to just watch and calls the golem by its name, Toby, as it approaches. He then commands it to go over there. The golem leaps toward Dorothy. Riley completes the order for it to bite, leaving her confused. Then the golem lunges and attacks her, making her scream. The creature bites Dorothy's face, who screams in pain. Arpel shouts for her as the girl cries. Taking advantage of the distraction, Riley quickly casts a spell. He fires a magic missile toward Dorothy. Arpel reacts as he sees the attack coming toward them. He then conjures a mana shield to protect her. Grimoire questions the use of just a mana shield while Riley prepares his next move. Arpel claims he's being underestimated, but the magic missile immediately starts to crack his mana shield. Then, Riley activates his dispel magic. The magic shatters the shield completely, and Arpel gets frustrated with the failed defense. At that moment, he shoves Dorothy aside at the last second, pushing her out of the attack's path. Grimoire praises Arpel's good reflexes. Dorothy falls to the ground, wounded, and angrily questions his way of fighting. But Riley retorts sarcastically, asking if they're knights and why he should care about being fair. He holds her down on the ground and reminds her that she gave him the option to fight or surrender. Facing Arpel, Riley then declares that he chooses to fight. Furthermore, he states that he will win as Dorothy grits her teeth. In the background, Olivia watches the scene hidden among the plants. He then challenges them to attack him, calling them pathetic worms. Meanwhile, the fight between Rebecca Duncan and Garen Theobald continues elsewhere. Garen repeats his order for Rebecca not to mention his granddaughter's name, but Rebecca provokes him, finding the order a bit harsh and questioning if it's because of her murderer nickname. Then Rebecca grabs him and declares that she doesn't care about others' opinions, but he has no right to insult her. At that, a vision reveals a bloodstained document showing she was disqualified for murdering an administrator. Furthermore, another document states she also massacred half the competitors, and Rebecca reveals she did it all to avenge Sharon. 2 years ago, during the selection test, candidates ran amidst spells and screams. Then Rebecca steps firmly onto a magic circle. She then celebrates first place, passing the test in record time. She dedicates the victory to Sharon, saying she won this time. At that moment, she turns to look for Sharon while other candidates complain about the clones and hallucinations. But Rebecca falls silent, sensing something strange. All the candidates are looking direction. Ahead, a golem advances as Sharon flees, begging for help. She keeps screaming for help, running from the creature. Rebecca shouts Sharon's name, not understanding why she's there, but her expression suddenly changes. Instead of helping, the other candidates start laughing at Sharon's situation. Then, the golem's fist descends toward her. Rebecca appears at the last second and uses a magic barrier to destroy the golem's fist. Pieces of the creature scatter as she glares at the other candidates. Her gaze turns savage. Back in the present, Rebecca tells Garen she has avenged Sharon. She explains they could have helped, but they let her die and even mocked her. She states that they killed Sharon, so she killed them in return. But Garen retorts that this isn't vengeance, but a massacre that dishonors his granddaughter's memory. The scene shows that 2 years ago, a deacon who administered the test was killed. A year ago, several veteran mages from all the schools also lost their lives. After that day, Rebecca's reputation began to change, and she became known as the Unchained Killer. Garen then accuses her of harming Sharon's honor, claiming his granddaughter is now blamed for creating a murderer. With that, he declares his intention for today. He will kill her himself to restore his granddaughter's honor. She then questions him, asking if honor is the only thing that matters to him. Rebecca points out that his granddaughter is dead, yet he's only worried about her honor. Finally, she concludes that he just doesn't seem to get it. At that, Garen attacks with rocks falling from the sky. Rebecca's clone is then crushed by the blow. Its remains are scattered on the ground. Then, the fake body dissolves into particles. Garen realizes he's been fighting a clone the whole time. He remembers the real Rebecca saying he couldn't insult her. Then, he calls the trick petty and prepares a light spell. Garen fires a beam to find his true opponent. His spell reveals her location, and he confirms that he sees her. Rebecca smirks, and Garen's eye widens. He then realizes she's right behind him, a dagger already in her hand. He tries to raise a defense, but Rebecca strikes with the dagger before he can react, and the weapon pierces Garen Theobald's shoulder. Finally, she pulls the dagger out with a smile. Blood spurts from the wound as Rebecca stares him down. Then Garen falls to his knees, questioning how she reached him so quickly. The world around him distorts, and time seems to slow down. He then recalls experiencing this countless times on the battlefield. It's the feeling of death, and he finally collapses to the ground. But Garen awakens from the vision, his head snapping up. Rebecca then approaches him and calls him old man. She holds him and expresses her disappointment that he was slower than Riley to escape the hallucination. She reveals that Riley managed it in 1 second while he took 2. Then Rebecca smiles and prepares for the final question. Finally, she grabs his face and asks if he just saw his own death. Her question about him seeing his own death echoes through the area. At that, Garen's heart races as he stares at her. He relives the image of her smiling after the attack, and then he sees himself on the ground, completely defeated. But Garen tightens his grip on his staff. He then brings a hand to his collar. Garen then smirks and calls her trick pathetic. Rebecca laughs and says her trick isn't as pathetic as the trap he set. Furthermore, she accuses him of creating this battlefield on purpose. She continues, stating it was all done to lure her in. Rebecca then glares at him for a moment. Then she says he knew she'd show up if there was a big fight. That's why he intentionally exposed the core's energy. Garen confirms the accusation as he knows there's no mage more eager for a fight than her. She sighs and confesses she wanted to go, but Riley stopped her. Garen says that since she didn't show up, he came looking for her himself. Then he points his staff directly at her neck and calls her the rampaging killer, Rebecca Duncan. But Rebecca catches the tip of the staff with her hand. At that, she begins to applaud slowly. She praises him for fighting and killing dozens just to find her. The scene shows his victims screaming in terror. Rebecca then grabs him and accuses him of contradicting himself by calling her a killer. Garen bites his lip in silence for a moment. He remembers her asking if he saw his own death and steps back. But he claims that contrary to what she expected, the death he saw was hers, and now he's going to show it to her. She watches him as an aura forms around them. Finally, Rebecca closes her eyes and remarks that this reminds her of what her mother used to say. She remembers her mother saying that herbalists die falling from cliffs to gather herbs. Also, swordsmen die by the sword and alchemists from accidents with forbidden elixirs. At that, she explains that a mage dies while using magic, so he should show her the death he saw. Her mother then wished for Becky to have an end worthy of a mage. Rebecca then holds out her hand and says she's looking forward to it to make her 27 years as a mage worthwhile. Then their auras collide and the fight resumes. Their hands meet in a clash of energy. Garen glares at her with determination. Meanwhile, Riley stomps on the ground and challenges them to come closer. He calls his opponents pathetic worms, enraging Dorothy Gruyard with the insult. At this, Riley comments to Grimm that she's easier to provoke than Becky, and he agrees. Arpel Stingwood holds back Dorothy, who questions how a rookie dares to look down on them, but she smirks and unleashes her dark aura. She then fires a powerful blast, vowing to destroy him. Grimoire warns that composure is one of a mage's most basic virtues. Then her attack collides with Riley's magic, who knows that emotional magic is predictable. At that, Riley charges forward. Dorothy and Arpel react in surprise, and he tells her to calm down. Grimoire then observes the scene and states that they've already won. A carnivorous plant bites one of the shadow tentacles. Riley then dodges the blow amidst the energy blast. He keeps moving forward, cutting through Arpel's vines along the way, but a vine ensnares him, causing him to flip in mid-air. He's left hanging upside down. Meanwhile, Dorothy yells for Arpel to get it together as the plant is attacking them. Grim more respects him for inheriting Cromwell's magic, but he laments that plant magic hasn't progressed in 300 years, concluding they'll never win with something so outdated. He then analyzes that Dorothy is already low on energy due to the shadow transport and her previous blood loss. Because of this, Dorothy is exhausted. Her shadow plants are slower, and she screams for the attack to just hit her already. Grim War concludes they only need to worry about the green-haired boy and that victory is certain at this rate. But Riley looks back and realizes the situation isn't good as they don't have enough time. He knows that even if they defeat these two, it will still be their loss if they can't help Rebecca in time. Therefore, they decide they need to take a risk to ensure victory. Grim War then asks Riley if he can sever the link between a mage and their summon, and he confirms he can. At that, Riley launches himself into the midst of the energy blast. He steps on one of the plant's vines and uses the momentum to leap higher. Olivia watches the scene. Dorothy and Arpel look up, not understanding what's happening. Olivia then wonders how it's possible for a mage to move like that as he charges forward. Riley continues his advance through the plants. He gets closer and closer to his target. His magic guides him along the way. Grim War explains that to sever the link between the mage and the summon, you just need to hit the mage directly. Riley lands the blow. With that, Arpel is knocked out. Dorothy faints too. Then both opponents fall to the ground, defeated. Riley feels dizzy from the effort, and Grim War asks if he's okay. That was a moment of intense and extraordinary concentration. He used his magic to move at high speed. Grim War then comments that a moment like that would leave him exhausted, and Riley agrees. Hidden. Olivia watches the scene. Riley then starts muttering to himself and walks toward his companion. He comments that Olivia seems to be fine too. He also notices she only has a few scratches and is surprised she stayed safe. But the golem Toby appears whimpering at his feet and he stops walking. Finally, Riley and Grim look at the small golden creature. Grim War notices the golem has been pierced as if attacked by the plant. Riley kneels beside the fallen creature. He then touches the exposed core in the wound and the creature cries out. With that, the golem falls silent. Then Riley holds the core in his hand. He puts the core away and states that it's not too late to help Becky. Their battle may be over, but the main fight hasn't ended yet. Grim War says he's already located her, and that they need to hurry to help in the fight against Garan Theobald, but the locating spell begins to fail. Suddenly, the spell breaks apart into particles. Then, a voice says, "That's enough." Riley and Grim look up in silence. At that moment, Garan Theobald appears before them. He then announces that Rebecca Duncan is dead. Furthermore, he declares that their test is over. Riley realizes that Becky's energy, which he had clearly felt, has vanished. But Grim War corrects him, stating he can still feel it, but her energy is very weak. He continues, explaining that with her energy so faint, she must be dead, and the team will be disqualified. With that, Riley concludes that he's disqualified. Garin then explains that Rebecca Duncan committed an unpardonable atrocity and needed to pay with her life. So Riley asks him if he lost a family member because of her, but Garin replies that he lost something much more important than that. He then reveals that he lost his honor. Riley remains silent for a moment. Then he accuses him of being a huge hypocrite, Mr. Theobald. He recalls that Garin despised those who used the test as a legal means for murder or just as a pastime. Moreover, Riley points out that he himself used the selection test for his personal revenge, acting exactly like those he hates. At this, Garin sighs and apologizes, stating he has nothing more to say. Riley looks down at the ground. Finally, he says the situation is very disappointing and that he's also a little angry. Then an aura of energy explodes around Riley. At this, Garan Theobald reacts with surprise. He then questions if he's trying to fight, but Riley confirms and Garan asks why since the test is already over. Riley then replies that it's because he killed Becky, Mr. Theobald. Garan scoffs, asking if he became friends with her and now seeks revenge. He repeats the question about avenging Becky, but he vehemently denies it. He then prepares a spell and says he's just annoyed about being disqualified because of her death. He adds that he doesn't care what happened between them because the important fact is that Garan wasted a year of his life. So he demands that Garan waste a year too or he won't be able to sleep. Garan then comments that he's truly a problem and admits his skill is far beyond that of a novice. He continues, saying he can see it in how Riley defeated the two members of his team. But that's precisely why he charges forward and fires an energy blast at Garan. And Garan states he will fight with everything he's got. The impact of the blows creates an explosion, but Garen's shield holds firm. Then Riley prepares another spell. He fires 5 consecutive magic missiles which are blocked by the defense. The force of the block pushes him back, but he recovers and looks up. Garen then taunts him, stating his defense can't be broken with that kind of magic. At this, Grimoire agrees they need more firepower to breach such a meticulous shield. He then starts to think of a plan, remembering the ruins might have something they can use. But he notices Olivia muttering in the distance. Grimoire complains that they're in trouble, while the coward trembles in fear and doesn't even offer to help. With that, he suddenly stops as he notices something unusual. Finally, he questions if she's really scared as Olivia is in the middle of a complex incantation. Grimoire then realizes that Olivia has been preparing to fight from the very beginning. He calls out to Riley, who responds immediately. He then reveals that the game changer they needed was there all along, Olivia's ancient magic. But Garen advises him not to do anything rash and to accept the outcome as the test is about to end anyway. So Grim tells Riley they just need to buy some time, and he asks for a moment to consider surrendering. Garen agrees and allows him to proceed. At that, Riley sighs. He then activates a spell to speed up his thought process. Grimoire explains that time is flowing slowly and that they need to hurry. He then approaches Olivia and tells her they need to cast the ancient magic right now. Grimoire analyzes that since it's a garden, there's no risk of collapse. He also notes that her pronunciation and sentence structure are perfect, having never seen a mage so fluent in ancient rune. He remembers Olivia bragging about being a genius, but he knows there's a fatal flaw. Then he points out that her spell is missing the initiation incantation, commenting on how the most important part was lost to time. Grimoire then explains that sometimes parts of an incantation get lost over time. Riley then asks what to do about the missing part, as that's why she couldn't cast the spell. But Grimoire suddenly smiles, knowing the answer. He then reveals himself to be a magic book that defies time and that he himself created the incantation thousands of years ago. He then turns to Riley and gives him the signal to begin. Then Riley calls out to Olivia, telling her not to stop chanting and to listen to him. He continues, stating that she must already know a crucial part of the incantation is missing. He then promises to tell her the missing line, but he asks her not to question how he knows, as it's a secret he can't share. Finally, he asks if she wants to try. She agrees, and Grim confirms the signal to proceed. With that, Riley looks back at Garen and declares that they will try to take down Garen Edward von Theobald on their own. Garen is then confused and questions him, asking if he wasn't just trying to surrender. But Riley just scoffs at the idea of surrendering. Then, Grimoire whispers the missing line to Olivia. At that, Olivia's eyes widen, and she continues the incantation with the new part. Garen then understands they have no plans to surrender, but a huge blast of energy hits his shield, which holds firm. Furthermore, the ground around Garen's shield begins to tremble, and a giant flower violently bursts from the ground. He then looks at the scene, not understanding what is happening. Then, a wave of energy strong enough to shake the ruins hits him, and he questions what they are trying to do. Riley replies that he's not sure and suggests he ask his colleague. He then gestures to Olivia, who continues mumbling her spell. Garen then stares at Olivia as her aura explodes, recognizing her as being from the Blaze Ark in school and questioning her identity. He then asks how they will use ancient magic, a lost art, but Riley cuts him off, saying that's not important right now. Riley then warns him that he must stop Olivia before she finishes. Otherwise, he'll die if he doesn't defeat him first. Garen mutters that they're a serious problem, and Grim agrees as the barrier begins to crack. Finally, he reinforces his shield as Riley's blow approaches. Then Riley casts a dispel spell against Garen's defense. He concentrates to maintain the spell. Meanwhile, Grimoire instructs Olivia on the next part of the incantation. Garen feels the heat rising and realizes his barrier is cracking. At that, Riley takes a step forward and lunges toward Garen once more. His fist then lands squarely on the legendary mage's face, but the impact from the defense throws him back amidst explosions. He turns and sees Olivia's energy intensifying. Garen then counterattacks, and Riley is hit by multiple energy strikes, but he manages to block the attacks. Garen then struggles to maintain his defense, shouting that it's just a little longer. Even with a nosebleed, Olivia continues to recite the spell. Finally, the magic circle fully activates, releasing immense energy. And Grimoire announces the final initiation line of the spell. Then, Olivia is no longer a romantic fool and completes the command of the Matron of Magic. With that, the forgotten legend of ancient magic, too powerful to be remembered, finally returns. She then grips her staff tightly. Furthermore, Olivia and Grim War smile as a weapon materializes in her hands. Riley watches the wave of energy advance against Garen's shield. Then Olivia completes the incantation, ordering the flames to rise into a blazing fire. Finally, a gigantic explosion of fire consumes the entire area. Grim reacts to the power of the magic. He stands up amidst the all-consuming flames. He then remarks that he can't believe the power Olivia managed to summon on her first try. Moreover, Grim War admits she has an extraordinary talent for ancient magic and flies off to find Riley. There, he finds the boy on the ground and asks if he's alive. Grim War sits beside Riley and notices he doesn't seem to have any serious injuries. Then Olivia runs towards them, shouting to see if they're okay, but she trips on a rock along the way and falls awkwardly to the ground. Grim War then observes that she should be weak after using such intense magic. He watches her for a moment, then he concludes that with her talent and perseverance, she has room to grow and will be a great help in the future. Just then, Riley wakes up. Olivia asks if he can move and he confirms he's fine. A little further away, Rebecca staggers and says there's something she needs to do now. Finally, she walks towards Garen, who is lying on the ground while Dorothy and Arpel remain unconscious. Grimoire observes that the opponents have severe burns and internal injuries needing weeks to recover, but a defensive spell protected everyone at the last second. Then, he raised his staff and activated the magic. Grimoire explains that it was Garen's defense that saved them because without it they would all be dead. But for some reason, Riley remains silent. Then, he notices Garen expanding the shield. The mage looks in his direction. The magic advances quickly. He then understands that Garen expanded the shield to protect them as well. Grimoire explains that even though they weren't the target, they wouldn't have been okay without Garen's shield. Then, Grimoire points out the obvious reason why Garen protected them, even though they were his opponents. So, he concludes that Garen never intended to hurt them. But Riley wonders why Garen attacked him as if he wanted to kill him. Grimoire pokes him and reminds him that he was the one who hit him first. He keeps poking Riley's cheek, who remains silent. Riley then uses magic to restore the energy circuits of the fallen opponents. Olivia asks if the emergency treatment is enough, and Grimoire confirms they'll be able to take care of themselves from now on. At that, Riley declares he's going to take the core Garen had for himself. He also tells Garen not to be disappointed and invites him to retake the test next year as he likes to return favors. But then he drops the core onto Garen's chest. Then the group moves away and observes the area from above. Riley comments that the cliff is high enough that no one will find what was left behind. Grimoire agrees as the core's energy is faint and there isn't enough time for others to find it. He then asks what Riley will do with the second core, and the boy says he doesn't know since he worked hard to get it. In the end, he decides to keep the second core as a souvenir. Then Riley invites Olivia to explore the nearby garden until the test is over, and she accepts. With that, the three of them begin to walk through the area together. Grimoire comments that even though they've been walking for a while, they haven't found any monsters or traps, and Riley finds the place interesting. Olivia then questions him about how he knew the last part of the incantation, but Riley reminds her of her promise. She remembers and gives up, leading Grimoire to comment on how easy she is to deal with, but Olivia remains silent for a moment. Olivia then calls out to Riley and asks if Becky is really dead. He remains silent as Olivia waits for an answer. At that, she grabs his arm. Riley then sighs, saying it's a shame and that he's a little sad about losing a classmate, but he states that even so, it wasn't a bad experience. Despite the outcome, they gained valuable experience with real combat and crisis situations. Grimoire then says that a 1-year delay isn't a problem as they can retake the test and enter the Arantes Mage Tower. Besides, the ultimate goal is to get revenge on the swindler who pretended to be his disciple's disciple. Riley then identifies Jan Arentz, the Tower Master who stole the level of immortality that Martha Pergaric dreamed of. But he corrects himself, revealing that the level of immortality was his dream, and he asked Martha to achieve it for him. Grimoire explains that if a signatory never died, he could study magic forever without needing to teach a new mage. That way, he could also find the one responsible for turning him into a book faster. He then says he conducted countless experiments to achieve immortality, and the spell is the result of years of research with his disciples. Riley smiles and says that's one more reason to get revenge on John Arantes since he tricked his disciples. In the end, they agree to do their best together as 1 more year of training won't be a big problem. Just then, Riley agrees with him, but they hear a sound coming from the bushes. He then says they can take their time, but a blue drop falls on his head. They look up and see Rebecca hanging upside down. Finally, she yells at them to hurry up and get her down. Surprised, Grimoire and Olivia watch as Riley calls out her name. She then asks why they're alive, but Riley scolds her for talking nonsense. Rebecca explains that Garen Theobald claimed to kill them, concluding that he obviously lied. Then, a shot of Garen Theobald's face is shown. Riley realizes Garen's lie was meant to make them give up on the test. Grimoire then understands why he also thought Rebecca was dead. She reveals that the dragon leather concealed her energy and asks to be let down before she gets dizzy. A blue energy dissipates into the air. Now free, Rebecca praises the speed of Riley's dispel and questions him about his skill. She complains that she couldn't break free herself and swears she's going to kill that old man. Riley replies that it's the result hard work, but Rebecca insists it just looks like talent. However, Grimoire and Riley notice something is strange about her. They realize Rebecca has no serious injuries, as if she never fought Garen at all. Rebecca accepts that Garen lied, but says she still has something to ask. Riley questions her directly, asking why Garen Theobald let her go. Rebecca is silent for a moment. Then she answers that he said he wouldn't stoop to killing her, so he forgave her. But he also told her to give up the test as penance. Riley and Grimoire remain silent. Riley concludes that she isn't telling the truth, and Grimoire agrees it's impossible for Garen to forgive her for such a ridiculous reason. He explains that a simple grudge wouldn't be enough to create that violent energy. Furthermore, Grimoire states that Rebecca definitely left a scar on him that can only be erased by her death, and yet here she is. So Rebecca is alive and well, but she's lying about how she survived. Grimoire corrects him, saying that to be exact, she just doesn't want to tell them the reason right now. He suggests it might be because the top 5 from the Mage's Tower are watching the selection test. Grimoire decides to drop the subject, and Riley agrees that the important thing is that Rebecca is alive. Rebecca then assumes that since they're all okay, they gave up on the test, and the old man told them to hand over the core. At this, Olivia looks at Riley, while Rebecca laments having to take the test a 4th time, and the mage with glasses celebrates sarcastically. Rebecca falls to the ground, and Riley comments that she seems disappointed. She laments having waited in vain for them to escape the old man. But at that moment, Riley places the core in her hand. He then asks if Rebecca knows what that is. Rebecca looks at Riley surprised. Next, she jumps up and declares her love for them. She then demands to know how they escaped the old man, but Olivia just stammers. The scene cuts to a defeated carnivorous plant on the ground. Elsewhere, Dorothy cries and apologizes, blaming herself for what happened. Arpel asks Dorothy to calm down. He reassures her that Garen is fine, though she continues to cry. Garen, supported by Arpel, takes the blame, admitting he let his guard down. He regrets underestimating the rookie girl, stating he could have defeated her if he had fought with everything from the start. He then remembers thinking that Arpel and Dorothy would be enough to handle her. However, the destruction around them proves they fought with full force. Garen concludes that they both lost to a mere rookie. Garen reflects that, in the end, the girl managed to face him, and he can't believe a prodigy who transcends the levels of magic mastery could exist. He admits he knew the girl was a monster, but he didn't expect this much, and then states he's recovered enough to walk on his own. Arpel suggests he rest a bit more, but Garen starts to walk with a limp. Dorothy then goes back to blaming herself for what happened. Garen laments the defeat, but as Arpel mentions next year's chance, Dorothy insists the old man will make it. He thanks them for the encouraging words as his group begins to move away. Garen stops suddenly. He comes across a new group that has a core. Garen then recognizes her as Pamela von Hasselpart. As Garen laments encountering them with his mana and strength depleted, Dorothy whispers that Pamela is just a low-level advanced mage. He decides the best option is to avoid combat and approaches to say they have no intention of fighting. Pamela then gives a smile. However, to Garen's surprise, Pamela's group bows and announces their surrender. They offer the core and ask Garen to spare them. One of the group members questions the decision to surrender again, asking why they have to give the core to that old man. Pamela dares her companion to fight, and he's shocked to realize it's Garen Theobald, while Garen's group understands the misunderstanding. One of Pamela's group members worries about being qualified, but she reassures him, stating they still have 10 minutes. He questions how they'll find another core in such a short time, but she confidently assures him that nothing is impossible in this world. Meanwhile, a red-haired woman sits at a table. She then comments that they got some interesting results this time. The list of candidates who passed the second test is revealed, first showing the group of Riley, Rebecca, and Olivia. Next, the group of Garen, Arpel, and Dorothy also appears on the list. Finally, Pamela's group is also listed. In the city of mages, Wilhelm, the group walks through the snow, and Rebecca comments on how nice the fresh air feels. She explains that even though the priest healed her injuries, she still feels exhausted after 2 days in the temple. Yawning, Rebecca then mentions that the final selection test will be held in 1 week. A flashback shows the evaluator confirming to the group that the final test will take place in a week. She adds that the test will include a one-on-one interview with each archmage from the 5 major towers. Grimoire reflects on the interview, seeing it as a good opportunity for Riley to showcase her talent directly. And more importantly, he mentions they'll get to see John Aaron's face in person. Back in the present, Rebecca announces she's going to rest and tells Grimoire that she'll be staying with an acquaintance in the city. She wonders if she hadn't already told them, and Riley confirms she mentioned it when she recommended the Sky Whale Inn. At this, Riley teases her about trying the place this time, and Rebecca glares at him as he laughs at her reaction. Rebecca then lets out a small laugh. Then she says her goodbyes, telling them she'll see them in a week and to take care until then. Grimoire asks Olivia where she'll be staying, and she replies that she'll be at the Grand Stingwood Hotel, just like Riley. Olivia mentions she's going to stop by the Arcadia Library on the way, while Riley can't wait to relax at the hotel. He plans to soak in a hot tub and eat ice cream all day, and Grimoire agrees that rest is important. Riley and Grimoire approach the hotel's entrance. Then Riley turns the doorknob, thinking she'll finally get her well-deserved rest. But as she opens the door, she comes face to face with Garen, Arpel, and Dorothy. Grimoire and Riley stand frozen, surprised by the unexpected encounter. Garen then recognizes them and comments that they're staying there too. Riley starts to close the door slowly. Just then, a hand stops it from closing completely. Dorothy holds the door, surrounded by an aura. She stares at Riley and calls her name. Suddenly, Dorothy breaks into a wide smile and greets her. She introduces herself as Dorothy Gruyard, and as she hugs her, Grimoire asks how their team passed. Garen explains that they were given a core. Grimoire is astonished, questioning if someone dropped out of the test just because they were a fan of Garen's. Garen then informs them that the other team passed as well, and Grimoire decides to stop thinking about it. Dorothy holds Riley's hands, excited that they'll all be taking the final test together, and she agrees. Riley then asks Arpel why he's being so friendly, and the young man replies that the fight was just for the test, plus he likes pretty girls. Arpel then invites Riley to eat with them, but she replies that she was planning to order room service. However, he convinces her by mentioning a celebratory banquet by a former royal chef, and Riley immediately agrees to go. The dinner table is laden with dishes. Riley then starts to eat large amounts of food quickly. Grimoire comments on her appetite, but the girl justifies it by saying she's still in her growth phase. At that moment, Arpel mentions they won't believe where the last core was found. Pamela explains that it was at the bottom of a cliff, in a place so deep you couldn't see the ground. While she complains about the location, Riley and Grimoire remember that they were the ones who found it, and the Grimoire suggests they keep quiet. Garen expresses his surprise that they found the core in less than 10 minutes. He then praises Pamela, calling her Wilhelm's best scout. But Pamela denies the credit and reveals it was someone else who found it. She introduces Gilbert Winifred, a disciple she trained in secret. Furthermore, Pamela says he was the one who found almost all the golden golems in the ruins. Garen shows interest in learning more about Gilbert, and Pamela agrees to tell him. However, as she begins to speak, Gilbert remains silent, just eating. Grimoire comments on Gilbert's arrogance for not saying anything, but acknowledges that he's talented and could even reach the expert level. Pamela then brags about how quickly Gilbert found the administration office. But Dorothy interrupts her to ask about Rebecca, questioning if she wasn't faster than Gilbert by passing the test in 4 hours. Pamela dismisses Rebecca from the conversation, stating that the assassin cheated by using clones, and Dorothy agrees. She then changes the subject, declaring that Gilbert must have the second best time since Garen took a day to pass. She then proudly reveals that it took him only 2 days to find the office. Garen reflects on the information, repeating that it was 2 days. Just then, Garen corrects her, stating that, unfortunately, Gilbert wouldn't be in second place. Pamela tries to justify herself, saying it's not fair to compare those who use proper methods with cheaters like Rebecca. However, Garen smiles and clarifies that there's a misunderstanding, as he wasn't talking about Rebecca. He then turns and asks Riley directly how long it took her to pass the first test. Grimoire remarks that the old man is silly for asking something he already knows the answer to, while Riley remains silent. Riley finally answers that it took her about half a day, or more precisely, 6 hours and 30 minutes, leaving everyone shocked. Garen confirms the time with pride, while Grimoire wonders why he acts as if Riley were his granddaughter. Pamela then screams, shocked by the 6-hour and 30-minute mark. Gilbert slams his fork on the table, stating that Riley has to be kidding. He then stands up and questions how a mere rookie found the office in half a day, declaring that he doesn't believe it. Furthermore, Gilbert asks if she even has the right to take the final test. He points at Riley, repeating that a rookie found the office in just half a day. Gilbert then explains that Wilhelm's energy barrier and the residual energy from experiments make it hard to find. Then, he accuses her of getting this far by cheating, while Grimoire wonders why he's so angry. At that moment, Dorothy gets Gilbert's attention and asks him a question. Surrounded by her aura, she challenges him directly, asking if he thinks he can beat her. Gilbert hesitates, aware that Dorothy is a skilled mage on the verge of the advanced level. He then clenches his fist, unable to answer, and she taunts him for his silence. Dorothy tells the rookie to shut up and reveals that Riley defeated both her and Arpel, leaving Gilbert's companion shocked. Gilbert's companion turns to Arpel for confirmation, and he states that Riley legitimately passed the second test. Gilbert glares at Arpel, saying it makes no sense, while Dorothy and Riley mock him in the background. He insists she's just a young rookie as Garen cuts his food. Garen then calls him by name and says they understand what he means. He explains that Riley is young and low-level, so anyone would be confused by a rookie passing the second test. Garen admits that at first, he also underestimated Riley, just like Gilbert. He also points out that Dorothy underestimated her too and paid the price, leaving her embarrassed. Garen adds that Arpel also underestimated her, making the young man ashamed. He states that it's acceptable to question someone's abilities as a mage's nature is to question everything. However, he adds a caveat. He questions whether it was truly appropriate to voice his doubts at this table. Grimoire reflects that he showed his hostility at a celebration in front of more experienced mages. Pamela then apologizes for her disciple's mistake, explaining he has no manners and promising to teach him a lesson later. Pamela then scolds him and demands that he apologize. Gilbert bows, apologizing for his rudeness, and Garen accepts, as long as it doesn't happen again. Grimoire then suggests that if Gilbert truly doubts her skills, he should challenge her to a duel, as she would gladly accept. Riley's image turns dark, and she emits a warning not to mess with her. Grimoire asks for her confirmation, and Riley replies that she's always ready for a duel with Gilbert, and it would be a pleasure. Grimoire questions the need for the threatening energy, and she replies that she did it so she wouldn't be bothered anymore and could go back to eating in peace. Grimoire then remarks that nothing else should happen. But upon hearing a knock on the door, he feels something is about to go wrong. Pamela then notices the visitor and invites the person in. Olivia appears at the door and explains that the staff sent her, causing Pamela to scream in panic. At this, Pamela begs to be spared, while Grimoire comments that he knew this would happen, and Riley predicts another hectic meal. Pamela's group panics, while Olivia watches the scene, confused. Riley observes her own hand. She then calls Grimoire and asks if there's a way to go through the second awakening early. The Grimoire asks if she has felt her limit, and Riley confirms she has. He explains that the second awakening is a blessing that marks the final stage of a mage's element and accelerates their growth. Grimoire says it's natural for her to feel her limit after the test, but Riley replies that her skills are practical and strategic enough. However, she has few attack options, and her specialties are like secondary tools, with magic missile being her only offensive spell. He concludes that the best way to overcome these limitations is to undergo the second awakening early, and Riley agrees. To answer her question, Grimoire states that it's not impossible, but it's incredibly difficult to achieve. He explains that this act, known as early awakening, defies the natural flow of magic, making it complex and difficult. He also warns that her talent won't help as it all comes down to perseverance and effort. Grimoire questions why she would go through all this now when she could focus on other training and wait for the natural awakening. But knowing this, he says that if she still wants to proceed, he won't stop her. Riley steps forward and states that she's going to do it. So Grimoire agrees, and they both prepare to give it their all, while Riley confidently declares she will succeed. She then opens the book and starts asking questions. Riley asks if an element seed in her mana heart awakens automatically upon reaching a certain power level. Grimoire confirms that all she needs is to reach a certain level of mana. However, Riley is confused as she thought the early awakening was meant to compensate for her lack of mana. She then realizes she needs more mana to awaken, and Grimoire confirms the paradox. He explains that the early awakening uses this paradox. And for that, Riley will have to lie from now on. He adds that she doesn't need to actually increase her mana, just trick her mana heart. She must deceive it until it believes she has plenty of mana, causing the element seed to release on its own. Once the seed is released, her body will think it has undergone the second awakening and will transform. He explains that the trick will expand her mana circuit and then states that, in theory, the process will take about 5 weeks. Riley repeats the time frame, but Grimoire clarifies that in reality, it will take much longer due to preparations. He details that she'll need to create an internal barrier, increase her body's tolerance, and go through dozens of stages, and Riley admits it sounds difficult. Grimoire warns her it will be painful, perhaps the most painful thing they've ever done, and Riley remains silent. Grimoire encourages her, saying that the greater the pain, the greater the reward. Riley then slaps the book and agrees to start. With that, she begins the training and an energy envelopes her hand. She then grimaces from the process. Grimoire says he knows it's painful, but asks her to endure it. He also warns her that this is nothing compared to what she'll go through in the next 5 weeks. Grim explains that the early awakening process will be painful, with the weight of the mana pressing down on her entire body. Additionally, she'll feel a burning sensation in her organs and vessels. He concludes by mentioning several other indescribable pains. Grimoire then warns her to prepare herself because the next 5 weeks will be hell. The scene shows Riley, who also remembered his warning. 5 days later, Riley shows off the energy and says his concern was just to motivate her. But he shouts that it wasn't a bluff while Riley thanks him for the motivation that sped up the process. Frustrated, Grimoire asks how she got the idea to go through all the suffering at once. He then calculates that finishing the 5-week process in just 5 days is 7 times faster than normal. Riley calmly replies that it was bearable, so she didn't need the 5 weeks, leaving Grimoire shocked. She then explains that she's been through much worse in the Thieves' Guild and that this pain is nothing. Grimoire then sighs and laments, mentioning the Thieves' Guild again. He wonders what they did to make her so indifferent to pain, and Riley reveals it was torture disguised as psychological training. She says they tied her to a pillar and ate chicken thighs in front of her, ignoring her pleas for a piece. Furthermore, for a week, all they gave her to eat was dry chicken breast. Riley adds they gave her nothing to drink but water, and Grimoire questions if that was more painful than the awakening. She confirms that it was, and the Grimoire concludes that maybe she's the weird one. Just then, an energy forms in her hand, and Grimoire reveals that Riley is a user of the electric element. He explains that the element possesses the destructive power of fire and the speed of wind, making it good for offense, defense, and support. Additionally, Grimoire promises he will teach her how to use all these characteristics. Then he enthusiastically states that she will become the perfect electric mage. However, he asks her if she has ever been struck by lightning. Next, he asks how she manages to be so in sync. He continues his question about the sync with her element as the energy spreads throughout the room. He gives an example. A mage who nearly drowned would gain the water element, while one who grew up on windy plateaus would gain the wind element. Riley replies that as far as she knows, she's never been electrocuted, and he suggests that perhaps the affinity comes from her past as a thief. But Grimoire remains confused as this kind of synchronization doesn't just happen out of nowhere. She then says she likes it as her magic feels more intense, and now she wants to test her new ability. Grimoire agrees that practice is important but realizes the problem is finding someone to test her new ability on. Suddenly, Arpel appears at their bedroom door, and Riley and Grim stare at him in surprise. Grimoire recognizes him as the mage who confronted them, while Gilbert hesitates at the door. Then, Gilbert finally manages to speak and challenges her to a duel. The proposal instantly excites Riley and Grimoire. At this, Gilbert covers his face and laments the situation. The news spreads, and a crowd gathers for the duel between Gilbert and Riley. He then watches the staff installing a defense system, realizing that everything has gotten out of control. Even the test administrators show up to watch, and he wonders if this will affect the final test. He then clenches his fist, wondering why the rookie didn't just refuse. The scene flashes back to 5 days ago with Gilbert in bed, remembering that he passed the first test and found the core on his own. But he remembers Riley's threatening image and insists to himself that he's not afraid of her. For days earlier, he decides that a victory against her would put his mind at ease, and he starts looking for her. 3 days earlier, he comments to Garen that although Riley is in the room across from his, he hasn't seen her in days. At this, he starts to get suspicious. 2 days earlier, he knocks on her bedroom door. but getting no answer, he is met only with silence. He then smirks, convinced that she's afraid to fight a genius like him. One day earlier, he sees her door is still closed and declares himself the true victor, calling her a coward. Back in the present, he remembers what he thought, but now he feels like he's going to lose. Gilbert wonders why Garen and Riley are so close since he thought they were enemies. Feeling anxious, he's startled when Pamela touches his shoulder. Pamela reassures him, telling him not to be afraid as the girl is a mere rookie who hasn't even awakened her element. Someone in the crowd comments that the duel will be watched by big names in the magical world. Pamela then encourages him, saying this is a chance to prove himself, and Gilbert feels determined. He then regains his confidence, reminding himself that he is, after all, a genius. Next, an announcer thanks everyone for waiting and announces that the duel is ready. He then begins to introduce the participants of the showdown. The first to be announced is the disciple of the top brawler, Pamela von Hasselpart. He then calls out the name of Gilbert Winifred. Next, he announces the opponent, a rookie approved by the defense specialist Garen Theobald. Finally, the announcer calls out the name of Riley. The announcer then declares that the duel may begin. In the arena, Gilbert faces his opponent and smirks. He, an advanced and promising mage, and the rookie prepare their energies for combat. Then Gilbert lunges forward with the first strike toward Riley. Gilbert Winifred breathes heavily after the confrontation. Dorothy Maisie Greard can hardly believe what she's seeing. Then Gilbert wonders if he really managed to defeat Riley, who lies on the ground, but he can't believe Riley passed out in just 2 rounds. Gilbert then claims his master was right. His opponent was no match for him. Soon, several people approach to congratulate Gilbert on his overwhelming victory. Next, Garen Edward von Theobald comes closer and takes his hand, calling his name. Everyone around them murmurs about the incredible offer to become Garen Theobald's disciple. However, Gilbert shakes his head in refusal. He thanks him for the offer but reaffirms his loyalty. He is a disciple of Pamela von Hasselpart and cannot have 2 masters. Garen then praises his attitude and offers his full support even if he doesn't become his disciple. Then a woman invites him to immediately join the 5 major mage towers, skipping the final test. The crowd quickly surrounds him, asking for autographs and inviting him to their respective towers. Gilbert just laughs boisterously, savoring the moment. From a distance, Riley calls out to Grimoire as they both watch the scene. Grimoire points out that Gilbert is on the ground smiling. Riley suggests leaving him be as he might be having a good dream. But Grimoire finds him boring, commenting that he'd hoped he'd at least have the skills of a scarecrow. Then Riley's hand begins to emit energy. He then unleashes an energy blast directly at Gilbert. Riley then reveals his opponent couldn't even withstand a single round. Still, he glances at the audience's reaction. The audience starts murmuring about his elemental magic, confirming the plan to stand out work. Grimoire remarks that this is the reaction he wanted, with everyone looking at them like they're monsters. Then, Garen Edward von Theobald approaches and questions Riley about how he managed to unleash his element without the second awakening. Grimoire then encourages him to tell his story, and Riley announces that he had an epiphany. He explains that after fighting in the test, he meditated for 5 days in his room until his element manifested on its own. Hearing this, Garen states that he wasn't wrong about him and calls him a genius. As he walks away, he advises him not to let his talent go to his head, warning that laziness is a fatal poison. Next, Rebecca Duncan comes over to congratulate him on his work, saying the electric element suits his chaotic nature. Furthermore, she reveals she gathered all those people in the auditorium just for him. Rebecca declares that thanks to her, the plan to promote Riley's element was a huge success. And she insists he shouldn't be shy and should just say, "Thank you, Becky." But Dorothy runs up to Riley demanding that he thank her for passing the test thanks to her help. Then everyone gathers to congratulate him, praising his talent and asking how he awakened his element. Grimoire yawns, commenting that's enough of these reactions and that it's now time for what's next. At that moment, the administrator arrives and notes that it's good everyone is there. Grimoire recognizes her, commenting that they probably earned more points from the fight. Then the administrator snaps her fingers, making a quill and paper appear in midair. She announces that she will make an additional statement regarding the final test. She reminds everyone that the final test consists of a one-on-one interview with the archmages of the Mage Towers, but she adds that the 5 major towers also have the right to nominate a candidate. Furthermore, the tower that exercises this right gets the opportunity to interview the nominee before any other. If the nominated candidate decides to join the tower after the interview, all other interviews are automatically cancelled. Grim War concludes it's a way for the towers to secure a candidate, and Riley asks if that basically means being accepted. Then Dorothy asks what happens if someone receives more than one nomination, and the administrator clarifies that the candidate chooses the order of the interviews. Riley comments to Grim War that if the nominations are being announced now, the list of nominees must have already been decided. Grim War then realizes the public fight was useless and regrets not encouraging Riley to unleash his element a day earlier. He then states that there's nothing more they can do about it. But Riley reassures him, saying it doesn't matter, as the only tower they'll choose is the Errant's Mage Tower. At that moment, the administrator prepares to announce the list of chosen nominees. First, she reveals the nominee from the Eucria Blue Mage Tower. She announces that the tower, established with the rise of the Empire, has nominated a candidate, and the chosen candidate is Garan Edward von Theobald. Garan nods, and Grim War explains that the 5 major towers always prefer experienced mages. Next, the administrator reveals that the nominee from the Dwight White Mage Tower is also Garan Edward von Theobald, and the 3rd nomination from the Gaia Violet Purple Mage Tower is also for him. At this, Arpel Mage, Stingwood, wonders what will happen if Garan takes all the nominations. The administrator then continues, announcing the nominee from the Jaden Grattan Red Mage Tower, and she announces the name of Olivia Maisie Triwizard. Olivia's eyes widen in reaction. Rebecca Duncan is surprised to learn Olivia's last name is Maisie Triwizard and understands why she claimed to be talented. Garan then interrupts the conversation, revealing that Olivia successfully used the long-lost ancient magic. He also adds that Rebecca wasn't present to witness the feat, but Rebecca confronts him, and the administrator interrupts to confirm that Garan is correct. She explains that Olivia did indeed evoke ancient magic, which attracted the interest of the Red Mage Tower's Archmage. At this, Olivia questions if the information is true, while Rebecca watches her. Grim War comments that the Red Tower played its card smartly while everyone was focused on Garan Theobald. Next, the administrator prepares to announce the nominee from the 5th and final tower, the Errant's Colorless Mage Tower. She then pauses briefly before revealing the name. Riley and Grim War watch her intently as she contains her expression, and she finally announces that the Archmage of the Errantes Mage Tower, Jan Errantes, has nominated Riley. The celebratory party continues with candidates mingling in small groups. Olivia asks if they were impressed, and a woman confirms she was strongly recommended to the Archmage. Then, Arpel Mage, Stingwood, advises another candidate to relax before the meeting with the Archmage. Meanwhile, Dorothy Maisie Grayard raises a toast with another mage. Riley observes that the Mage Towers are already treating the candidates as if they've been accepted. Grim War comments that the final test seems too relaxed, suggesting the 5 major towers have already chosen their candidates. He concludes that the meeting with the Archmage is just a formality as Rebecca Duncan stumbles towards them. Then Rebecca leans on them to greet them. Grim War asks if she spoke with the tower staff, noticing she's completely drunk. At that, Rebecca reveals to Riley that she prefers the Eucria Tower since the others hesitated to speak with her. She wonders who would accept her after what she did as Garan Edward von Theobald approaches from behind. Then, Garan interrupts them asking for a moment. He asks Rebecca Duncan if she also plans to join the Eucria Tower. She confirms that she does as she intends to follow in her mother's footsteps. Riley then asks her if her mother was also a mage. Rebecca then clarifies that her mother was a famous alchemist who also belonged to the Eucria Tower. Garan questions her about joining the tower to work with her mother, but Rebecca denies it, saying there's no way that could happen. Riley then asks if it's because they're in different fields of magic, but she just says no. She then reveals that her mother passed away 11 years ago. Rebecca then questions why no one apologizes for bringing up such a painful memory. As she continues, Riley interrupts her and reveals that he also lost both his parents when he was young. At that, silence falls over the table and Rebecca quickly apologizes. Suddenly, Riley takes the glass from Rebecca's hand. He then downs the glass in one go, drinking the entire contents. Rebecca says that she used to visit the tower with her mother as a child and became close to the Archmage whom she called Auntie. She reveals that she stayed at the Archmage's house during the test. And while Riley calls it cheating, Rebecca claims that countless mages do the same. To prove her point, she points to the man talking with Arpel Stingwood and identifies him as her professor. Furthermore, Rebecca reveals he is also one of the administrators for this selection test. She then comments that the man looks even younger than Arpel himself. Rebecca explains this is because he's from the Errant's Mage Tower where the executives never age thanks to an immortality spell. At this, Grim War fixes his gaze on the administrator from the Errant's Tower. Rebecca then states that the magical world is small, and she isn't the only one with personal connections within the 5 Great Towers. Riley asks Grimoire if this is true, and he confirms it, explaining that the social circle becomes even smaller after passing the test. Hearing this, Riley questions if these relationships can't affect the final test's outcome, but Grimoire says no and uses Riley himself as an example. He explains that even as a newcomer, Riley is already drawing a lot of attention, which proves the selection is based strictly on merit. Then, Garen Edward von Theobald interrupts him, asking if he plans to join the Errant's Mage Tower. Riley stares back at him. The image of the administrator announcing his nomination by the Errant's Tower comes to his mind. At that moment, he notices Garen's expression. Garen is watching him intently. While Grimoire comments on Theobald's strange expression, Riley confirms he'll join the Errant's Tower because he was nominated. Suddenly, the administrator's hand touches Riley's shoulder. She approaches and congratulates him on his good choice and then asks if she can join them to explain a few things. After sitting down, she apologizes for the late introduction and presents herself as Isabella Maisie Triwizard, the test's executive administrator. Rebecca is surprised to hear the surname Triwizard, and Isabella confirms she's correct. Then Isabella reveals she is Olivia's great-aunt, but adds that her niece doesn't seem to know her. At this, Grimoire comments that being a great-aunt puts her in Olivia's grandmother's generation. Riley then asks her if she is from the Errant's Mage Tower. With a smile, Isabella confirms that she is. Furthermore, she introduces herself as one of the 7 deacons of Errant's and assures Riley he won't regret his choice. Next, Isabella continues her explanation smoothly. She details how the tower secured its place among the top 5 over 300 years, maintaining its prestige with its philosophy and vision. But above all, she highlights the tower's main reputation. The tower is renowned for inheriting the work of the great sorceress Martha Pergaric and for successfully completing the immortality spell. For Riley, however, none of that makes sense. Isabella then reveals that the Archmage is very interested in him and therefore used the right of nomination without hesitation. And she conveys the Archmage's message promising that Riley will have all possible support if he decides to join them. Finally, she informs them that more details will be given at the next day's interview and wishes everyone a good night. However, Isabella's story creates a contradiction because if she is a deacon, she must know that John Errantes lies about being Martha's disciple. But the way Isabella tells so many lies so effortlessly shows that she is definitely on the same side as John Errantes, and Grimoire regrets not being able to strike her. Then Riley offers to do it in his place, but Grimoire quickly refuses, telling him not to. Instead, he suggests they focus on the next day's interview and that Riley should get some rest. Just then, they hear a knock on the door. Someone keeps knocking from outside. Grimoire wonders who could be knocking so late at night, and Riley asks who it is. Just then, Rebecca Duncan announces herself from the other side of the door. But Garen Edward von Theobald pushes her face away and orders her to get out of the way. As she complains, he asks Riley to please open the door. Grimoire and Riley wonder why Garen and Rebecca are there. Then, Garen enters and immediately casts a security spell throughout the room. Grimoire realizes the magic is meant to silence the area, detect eavesdroppers, and even disrupt the flow of energy. Garen then questions the need for such discretion, but confirms the spell should be enough. He then turns and calls out to Riley. Grimoire comments that he didn't expect him to be so direct, and Riley questions him about the reason for his visit. Garen then announces that soon there will be a war. He clarifies that it will be a literal conflict and guarantees that by the end, the Errant's magic tower will be wiped off the map. As Riley questions him, Grimoire just watches. But Rebecca, still drunk, interrupts him, calling him an old geezer. Garen asks what she wants, and Rebecca replies that he's forgetting something. Rebecca shouts that the Errant's Tower is already off the Imperial map because it's an unexplored land, but Garen tells her to shut up for not understanding metaphors. She then asks what metaphors are, leaving everyone in silence. Then, Garen uses a mind-cleansing spell to cure her drunkenness. Riley asks what she came here to do, and Rebecca replies that it's a difficult topic to discuss sober. But Garen glares at her and calls her by her last name, making her agree to talk. At that, Rebecca takes a deep breath to compose herself. She then turns to Riley and says he must be considering the Errant's magic tower favorably. She adds that she doesn't blame him as the Archmage appointment and the Deaconess's offer are truly tempting. Rebecca admits she would be tempted too, but Riley decides to hear them out before making his decision. Grimoire then suggests that perhaps they know something he and Riley don't. Then Rebecca explains that the Orontes Tower rose to prominence in just 300 years, shaking up the old world of magic. She claims that everyone in the tower is very progressive and that there are no stubborn members stuck in the past. Furthermore, they are flexible and open to new opinions, which makes them the most popular tower today. However, the truth behind this image is quite different. At this, Garen turns to Riley and asks if he knows how the Orontes Tower managed to become one of the top 5 in such a short time. Grim War suggests the tower's rise is due to Jan Orontes proclaiming himself the sole disciple of the great sorceress Martha Pergeric. He explains that with the position of Grand Sorcerer vacant for 300 years, the existence of a single disciple would be enough to shake the world of magic. But Rebecca, while agreeing, states there's an even bigger reason for the Orontes Tower's rapid growth. Then, Jaren confirms that there is indeed another reason. He reveals it's something he and Martha researched their entire lives and failed to achieve. But John Orontes managed to complete the immortality spell. At this, Rebecca reaffirms that it is indeed the immortality spell. She explains that John Orontes granted the spell to the tower's executives, including the 7 deacons, who in return swore loyalty for eternal life. Rebecca describes the system as a dictatorship because thanks to the spell, the Archmage of Orontes will never be replaced. Furthermore, the power of immortality has protected the tower from the political influence of outsiders, unlike other groups. She also adds that the rich and noble began to support the tower in exchange for the spell, which guaranteed them financial stability. With this, Riley concludes that the rise of the Orontes Tower in just 300 years was solely thanks to the immortality spell. But he points out that there's still something very strange about this whole story. He then describes the undead who defy death and the dark mages who use necromancy. He explains that everyone who dares to defy death and the rules of heaven is marked with the irreversible curse of demonic energy. Finally, Riley questions why the mages of the Orontes Tower who used the immortality spell were not affected by this curse, and he finishes by asking why they show no trace of demonic energy. Rebecca replies that no one knows, explaining that the debate over the spell is why John Orontes is not yet a Grand Sorcerer. Riley then turns to Grimoire and asks why the people of the Orontes Tower are free from the curse, but Grimoire simply admits he has no idea. He then shrugs and confirms he really doesn't know how they are free from the curse, and that's why he concludes he's sure Jan Orontes is a fraud. He explains that the spell is something even he couldn't master in millions of years, and now he wonders how he can defeat his opponent. At this, he realizes Rebecca couldn't have gotten this information alone, and she confirms there are 3 groups against the Orontes Tower. The first group is the Imperial family, who fears the nobles will retain power forever thanks to the spell. Second is the Grand Temple, concerned that the spell will break the natural cycle of life and death. And finally, the other 4 great magic towers, who are apprehensive about the Orontes Tower's rapid rise to power. She explains the reason is that the Orontes Tower has never hesitated to eliminate anyone who stood in its way. She adds that the tower's members will do whatever it takes to achieve their goals, and she reveals that's how both she and Theobald lost the people they loved. At this, Rebecca just grits her teeth. She then reveals that they were the ones who killed her mother and Sharon. At this, Grimoire comments that he knows exactly how they feel. He observes the intense hostility they both show towards someone, and he realizes they want revenge against the same person he is targeting, John Orontes. Then Garen turns to Riley and makes a sincere request. He asks him to please not join the Orontes Magic Tower. Riley then addresses Rebecca and Garen Theobald. He then asks if they would like to hear his plan. Elsewhere, Administrator Aaron Sex appears in the gloom. Isabella Maisie Triwizard then appears and asks him what he's doing there so late. He replies that he was just lost in thought. She then asks how it was to see his disciple Arpel again, but is surprised by his simple comment. But he replies that, obviously, that wasn't his only comment. He then explains that Arpel mage, Stingwood, has always shown remarkable talent thanks to his family's spell and his teachings. Aaron says he's proud of his rapid growth and predicts that at this rate, Arpel will become an expert mage in 10 years. Isabella then asks about his disciple's age and confirms the prediction that he'll become an expert before he's 40. At this, she remarks that it took both of them over 50 years to reach the expert level. And considering the Empire's greatest shield reached that level at 43, she concludes his disciple must be a genius. He agrees. And Isabella comments that few mages are so promising before asking him a question. Then she asks him what he thinks about that genius losing to a mere 15-year-old. Isabella laughs at the situation while Aaron remains silent. Aaron then admits that if he hadn't witnessed the event himself, he would have found the story utterly absurd. Isabella then brings up the name of the Grand Sorceress Martha Pargarish. She reveals that on that day, a 15-year-old broke that record by reaching the advanced level. She says that Martha Pargarish reached the advanced level at 21 and the expert level at 30, a true genius. Aaron simply comments that the young woman is incredible as Isabella laughs. He then asks if she believes Riley could become the next Grand Sorceress, filling the position that has been vacant for 300 years. But Isabella says that while the young woman might try, it would be difficult to succeed Martha Pargarish right away. Besides, she reveals that as Aaron already knows, someone is destined to become the Grand Sorcerer before her. At this, she reminds him that they now only have 3 months left. Aaron reacts to the news and a bit of wine splashes from a floating goblet. He then cleans up the mess with magic, complaining that she appears and disappears as she pleases. He then takes off his glasses to clean them. After putting them back on, he approaches the window to enjoy the view. Outside, a blue star drawn in the sky forms a magical barrier around the test administration office. He recognizes the inverted pentagram as a powerful central circuit kept hidden by several advanced spells. Aaron then admires the star's beauty, unable to imagine how long it took to create it. Just then, a figure approaches and comments that it seems everyone has arrived. Noon arrives on the day of the final test, and Isabella announces that the last stage is about to begin. A guide explains that the archmages are waiting behind the door and invites Riley to enter. He approaches the portal that leads directly to John Arante's room. At this, Riley asks if he's going to meet John Arantes, and Grimoire confirms. Grimoire reflects on how the fraud, John Arantes, the target of his revenge, is just behind that door. He recalls that it took them half a year to get here, a journey that felt very long. Grim reveals he wants to question him about pretending to be Martha's disciple and how he deceived the world with the immortality spell. Then he brings a hand to his face, impatient with the situation. Riley advises him not to rush as today is just the beginning, like the first dot on a canvas. Grimoire states that while he can't punish Janarantes now, he will definitely be punished one day. He then pats Riley on the shoulder to encourage him. Then Riley turns to the portal and announces he's going in. At that, his eyes blink once. They walk together through a dark space. Upon arriving, Riley looks around and comments that this is an empty world. They continue walking through the empty space, leaving a trail of footprints behind. But suddenly, Riley stops walking. Just then, he notices a line drawn on the floor right in front of him. Grimoire then explains that the line is imaginary, a boundary between life and death created by his senses. Riley leans forward to see what lies ahead, and the space reveals itself to be the top floor of the tower, the room of the Archmage. John, the two of them observe their surroundings. Then a voice praises the child's perception. John Arantes, the Archmage of the tower, warns him that one more step would have killed him. Grimoire remains silent as he watches him. Then he calls him a bastard. The Archmage continues to look in their direction, but he is looking directly at Grimoire and asks what book that is. Grimoire then realizes the Archmage has been watching him strangely from the beginning, and it wasn't his imagination. He then turns to Riley and suggests that for now they should do something. Grimoire reacts with surprise to his attitude, but Riley just observes the environment in front of him. Grimoire then comments that he is completely tense, and Janarantes continues to focus his gaze on the book. Then Riley replies that the book he's holding belonged to his late mother. At this, the Archmage stares at him with a surprised expression. Jan Arantes asks if Riley's late mother's diary has become a magical item that calms his mind. Riley confirms that carrying the book really does make him more comfortable. He then whispers to Grimoire that he made up an excuse, but his friend believes Jane Rance didn't notice his presence. Grimoire explains he took a vow of silence with his disciples, and Riley questions why the old man would be curious about him. Grimoire concludes it'd be strange for Janarantes not to be curious since Riley carried it during the whole test. Janarantes then turns to them and asks if they know how to play chess. Grimoire finds the question odd and says that obviously everyone knows how to play chess, but Riley replies that he doesn't, and Grimoire questions his answer. He argues that in Lathamus, everyone plays chess, even in tournaments where the loser turns into a dog. Riley explains he had no friends to play with, and Grimoire offers to play a match, stating he's never lost to anyone. Riley then confirms to John Arantes that he knows how to play chess, and the older mage approves of the answer. With that, Janarantes snaps his fingers. Suddenly, the entire room transforms into a huge chessboard with floating pieces. Riley and Grimoire land together on one of the pieces. Next, two large pieces of armor materialize in front of them. Other armored pieces now mounted on horseback also materialize. Riley and Grimoire watch the board form completely around them. Then figures of a king and a queen position themselves behind the two, completing their army. John Irantes, sitting on his throne, formally invites them to a match. Immediately, an enemy piece advances and attacks with its sword, but one of their allied pieces blocks the blow with its shield and sword. Grimoire comments that the pieces seem alive just as one of them is destroyed. Riley watches the situation intently. He then points out that their pawn has been defeated, and Grimoire tells him to be quiet so he can focus, insisting he can win. Grimoire then begins to command the pieces, moving the pawn, the knight, and the bishop. He finally feels like he's getting the hang of it and manages to balance the game. Still, he's worried about Jan's attitude. He notices that Jan Irantes just stares at Riley, not caring about the game he himself proposed. Then Jan Irantes asks if he knows what the color associated with each mage tower means. Riley confirms to Grimoire that he learned about it in Latamus. Riley begins to explain that the colors symbolize the characteristics of each mage tower. He says the Dwight Tower, which explores pure mana, represents white. Then the Yadin Groton Tower seeks the explosive power of energy and symbolizes red. Also, the Gaia Violet Tower seeks elegance and beauty and magic, represented by purple. Meanwhile, the Ukria Tower follows the path of magic with a resolute and disciplined mindset. Finally, he concludes that the Ukria Tower is symbolized by the color blue. John Irantes agrees with his entire explanation precisely, but he reveals that the Errant's Mage Tower does not have a color. It is colorless. He explains this allows the tower to become any color, being pure like white, passionate like red, elegant like purple, or resolute like blue. John Irantes then declares that this has been their way of life for the past 300 years as a piece explodes on the board. Riley prepares for the next move amidst the rubble of the destroyed piece. John Irantes states that this is their art of living. And that's how the Errant's Tower became one of the 5 greatest mage towers in just 300 years. Riley, however, claims that it's all a lie. At that, Jan Arrants invites him to make his move on the board. Grimoire reflects that the test isn't just about winning or losing and wonders what Jan Arrantes really wants to assess. He observes that the opponent's moves are aggressive and that the 2 kings on the board seem to be in a panic. Riley comments that it's a good thing this is just a game, and Grimoire agrees, calling it a literal war. Both then imagine how terrible the situation would be if this were real life. Then, John Irantes begins to speak, explaining that chess takes on different forms depending on who's looking at it. He continues, saying that for some it's a game and for others a battlefield, and then asks Riley what he sees. Riley replies that he sees an ancient ruin, exactly like the one he saw during the second test. Then Jan Arrants asks how he feels about the second test that took place 5 days ago. He explains that thanks to the test's method, he was able to discover a gem like Riley, but in return, dozens of mages lost their lives. He then asks Riley if peaceful measures are enough to distinguish the talented or if pushing people to their limits is the best form of evaluation. Riley remains silent for a moment, but he turns and asks for the Archmage's own opinion first. Jan Arrantes retorts that he asked for his opinion. With an aura manifesting around him, he questions how the boy dares to answer his question with another question. Riley calmly confirms his action and says the reason for asking back is simple. Grimoire realizes that, in the final test, the competitors and the Mage Tower's values need to align. So Riley declares that the Archmage's answer will be his since the Arrantes Tower's values are colorless and adaptable. Jan Arrantes reacts with a brief pause to the young man's statement. At that, he stares at Riley and then concludes that the boy is certainly interesting. Jan Arrantes begins to explain that some mage towers believe in certain methods. He says they think peaceful measures like the first test are enough to assess a mage's skills. But he points out that of the 42 mages who passed the first test, many didn't move on. He then rhetorically asks how many of them actually survived the next stage. Riley stands firmly on the chessboard. At that, Jan Arrantes declares the second test was the true selection as a mage's power is only revealed on the battlefield. He then asks Riley if forcing competitors into a deadly situation just to select a few is unfair. Riley and Grimoire look at the Archmage. Riley replies that it's obviously unfair as one shouldn't sacrifice the greater good for the lesser. Grimoire adds that, however, this is what it means to walk the path of magic. He continues, explaining it's an unjust road from the very beginning with some born with high mana affinity or execution. According to him, these are the blessed ones, chosen by mana itself to walk the path of magic. He states that even on this path, injustice prevails and every mage will inevitably face a limit. A limit that he says can only be overcome through innate talent. Jan Arantes then concludes that magic isn't fair, being like a difficult climb for some and a walk in the park for others. Grim War says some may walk the path alone while others march with many by their side. At this, Lainrance concludes that everything is determined by talent and questions if a more unjust path exists. Riley holds Grim War in his book form and agrees the old man is right, beginning to explain his own view of the path of magic. He then describes it as an endless stream of injustice as visions of hands call out to him. Then he remembers one of his old masters covered in blood calling for him. Grim War begins to tell a story from long ago before the Empire even existed about his first signatory named Findal. He explains that since he had just become a book, Findal was like a ray of light for him. But he still vividly remembers the moment his first master died. His master was begging for help, screaming that a person was dying there. No one on the busy street heard him, and everyone ignored his cries for help. Grim War says that after that day, he spent thousands of years without a disciple, fearing they would die. He reveals he never called them disciples, but signatories, as it was a contract of mutual interest, devoid of feelings. In this process, he admits he used his signatories as tools and forced them into dangerous methods without caring for their safety. Their repeated deaths became mere data for achieving better results, and the vicious cycle continued. This bloody cycle was only broken when he met a certain boy. He continues his story as a vision of a blood-soaked book is shown. Then, he reveals the name of the first great sorceress, Rule Nirave, a name lost to time but important to him. Grim War admits he put her through countless risky experiments and she came close to death several times. Despite it all, she survived and became a great sorceress, and he then reveals what her last words were. In her final moments, Rule Nirave thanked him for training her and never giving up on her despite her lack of talent. But Grim War reflects that he did it all for himself, never caring for her well-being or safety. Back in the present, he says that it was in that moment he realized something. He realized he had become a monster who only cared about revenge, and his path was built on countless sacrifices. He then states that he regrets that past and seeks forgiveness for the injustice and the blood spilled. After that, he changed his method so no one else would be sacrificed, and he recalls asking a child for their name. The child replied that they would remember his name but asked what Grimoire's own name was. A brief memory of his human form flashes through his mind. At that, he remembers introducing himself as the Great Book of Magic, promising to turn the child into a great sorcerer. Grimoire explains that his training method was developed through the sacrifices of his former signatories, which allowed his disciples to become great sorcerers. John Arantes then faces him and repeats the question. If this isn't an unjust path, then what is? Grimoire agrees that he is right and that the path of magic is indeed unjust. He laments that his former signatories could have become great sorcerers, but they died because they met him too soon. But then he declares that Jan Arantes has no right to call the path unjust. He accuses Jan Arantes of stealing the result of all those sacrifices, calling it an insult to Martha Pergeric. Furthermore, he considers it an offense against the path he walked, the sacrifice signatories, and himself. Riley then questions how he dares speak of the path of magic after reaching his position through lies and deceit. Therefore, he refuses to accept John Arantes' claim. At this, Riley tells Grimoire he understands his anger when others dishonor the path they've chosen. So he proposes they make a promise to each other where Grimoire will help him with his revenge. And in return, he will help with the revenge against Jan Arantes, and Grimoire finally agrees. Riley also guarantees he will hold accountable whoever turned Grimoire into a book, and his friend agrees they'll do it after their revenge. They then walk toward Jan Arantes, and Grimoire declares he will destroy him. He continues, saying he will start the destruction from within. And Grimoire finishes, stating that Jan Arantes will pay the price for his crimes. John Arantes then interrupts him and asks if he knows about the roundtable meeting happening in 3 months. Riley explains that the meeting is with the 3 greatest powers, and he heard the focus will be John Arantes' ascension to Grand Sorcerer. John Arantes then confirms the information is correct and reveals he has a plan before the meeting. He then reveals his plan to eliminate all members of the 3 greatest powers before the gathering. Riley reacts to his statement. Then Riley states he doesn't understand what Jan Arantes is saying. Jan Arantes questions if he really thought the wall of silence in the room would stop him. He then reveals he could hear their entire conversation, and Riley recalls the exact moment. The scene shifts to a day before the final test, where Riley asks Rebecca why the Arantes Tower killed her mother. Rebecca replies that the reason was something her mother always said. In a memory, her mother comforts her and says she hopes that she completes the thought, saying she hopes her daughter has a fitting end for a mage. Her mother, Rosalia Duncan, was firmly against the immortality spell, claiming it went against the laws of heaven. So Rosalia traveled to find a rare chemical reagent, and months later, she was found severely injured in the mountains. Unfortunately, it was too late for treatment, and Rosalia's life ended in vain. During the funeral, people whisper about how strange it is for an advanced mage to have been killed by mere bandits, and a young Rebecca overhears the conversation. But the official investigation concluded she had drained her energy during a blizzard and was then attacked by bandits. Young Rebecca, however, rejects this explanation. She yells that her mother, a potion maker, calculated everything and would never die from energy depletion. And she accuses everyone present of knowing the story about the bandit attack is complete nonsense. But a man cuts her off and tells her to stop just as she was about to say someone was behind it all. Young Rebecca hides behind a rock as the golem passes by her. Then the stone creature turns its head. But the golem ignores her and attacks another nearby competitor. The competitor laments he was so focused on running, he didn't even notice the golem. He then realizes it's over for him. At that moment, the golem attacks him, leaving him on the ground. However, the creature turns and starts chasing only Sharon, and another participant wonders what happened. Back in the present, Rebecca recounts that the stone golem was only after Sharon, but the administrator ignored her. In the memory, she pounds on a barrier, warning that the golem was acting strangely, but he just tells her to be quiet. The administrator then states that he will be the judge of the situation. Rebecca demands that he let her out, but the man refuses. She explains that since she had already crossed the finish line, she could do nothing, while some even laughed at Sharon. Eventually, Sharon became exhausted, fell, and that was the end. Rebecca says she got her revenge on the administrator and those who laughed at her, but she still felt empty. She concludes that after losing her purpose, she realized that mages without a goal are consumed by their inner demons. Rebecca was about to be completely consumed by her inner demons. Just then, a voice calls out to her, telling her to get a grip. Then, the voice reveals they have found the true culprit behind her mother's death, giving her a new purpose. Archmage Jaren Hartana then declares that the truth about the Arance Mage Tower has been revealed. He explains to Rebecca that after an 11-year investigation, they discovered the Arance Tower hired assassins to kill Rosalia. But Rebecca adds that the Arance Tower also covered up countless other deaths as accidents. Moreover, Sharon's death was one of those cases. It was revealed that the Arance Mage Tower had cast a spell on the stone golem. They planned to kill Sharon from the very beginning. The plan was to move Garan Theovault, the Empire's greatest shield, from the Western Front. Rebecca then gives the floor to Garan, who reveals he protected the Western Front only for his family, especially for Sharon. He confesses that when Sharon died, he no longer had the strength to continue. At that point, the Western nobles turned to the resurrection spell just as the Arantes Tower had planned. Garan admits he wandered aimlessly until he heard a rumor about Rebecca, which gave him a new purpose. He then swears he will execute the killer who dishonored Sharon. Garan explains that when he was about to kill Rebecca, she dragged him into the illusory world. He continues, saying that in that place where they could escape surveillance, Rebecca revealed the whole truth. Rebecca then concludes the story, declaring they will expose the crimes of the Arance Tower and brand them as forces of evil. Their plan is to do this in 3 months during the roundtable meeting. Grimoire then understands the meeting was never about deciding John Arrance's qualification as a great mage. Garan confirms the meeting is just a tool to deceive the Arance Tower, and that the real purpose is to execute John Arance. Back in the present, Riley concludes that John Arantes will be judged by the 3 powers at the meeting and asks him if he's wrong. Grimoire realizes John Arantes knew everything and was just testing them, and Riley agrees that feigning ignorance would be foolish. John Arantes confirms their assumptions are correct and that the 3 powers plan to label him as evil to defend the tower. Then John Arantes says he will show him something. He asks if the boy wants to know his plan to destroy the 3 powers and unleashes his energy. The wave of energy hits Riley in Grimoire. John Arantes then tells the boy to open his eyes and look around. They are now floating in a magical space, and John Arantes declares that this is his plan. Grimoire recognizes the place as Wilhelm and notices something huge above it. He then wonders if that is a magic circle. John Arantes says the magic circle is just a stepping stone and tells Riley to look around. They float above the continent, and John Arantes points to the magic circles scattered across the empire, claiming his plan is on another level. Grimoire then explains that these magic circles transfer targets to another world. He realizes the circle's energy has already blended into the environment, covering the entire empire without anyone noticing. At this, Grimoire calls John Arantes a bastard. Jan Arantes announces that after 343 years, his plan is finally complete and that he intended to rule the continent from the start. He then declares he will eliminate the three powers before the round table meeting even begins. Riley, however, remains silent for a moment before addressing him. He reminds Jan Arantes that he hasn't been officially accepted into the tower and can still choose another one at any time. Then Riley asks why the Archmage is revealing all this to him. Jan Arantes just stares at him in response. Suddenly, scene changes and they are transported back to the throne room. Grimoire comments that they're back in reality and that it was a quick teleport. Jan Arantes then moves a finger and Grimoire reacts with confusion. Immediately, a knight chess piece leaps to attack and Grimoire curses his opponent. Grimoire yells that it's his turn and calls Jan Arantes a cunning bastard, but the mage simply says it's now Riley's turn. At that moment, Grimoire realizes Jan Arantes made a move against the rules, leaving their king completely trapped. Jan Arantes then declares that this is his answer for Riley. He explains that Riley is like the king on the board, having never had a choice from the very beginning. Jan Arantes states that Riley was born to compete and always finds a way to win, even against all odds, but he continues speaking. He points out that Riley came to him knowing the tower would be taken down at the meeting and that he too sensed something. With that, Jan Arantes declares that with the tower, they could conquer the continent and that Riley wants the same things he does. He then invites him to rule the continent and start a new era of magic, asking him to take his hand. He emphasizes that with the tower, the continent will be at their feet. And Riley responds that together, they will start a new era of magic. Riley and Grimoire then walk toward the chess pieces. He then remembers the reason he wanted to join the tower, questioning if it wouldn't be better to join another one. At this, Rebecca and Garen question his decision to still want to join the Arantes tower. But the reason he continues, despite the warnings, is that he walks up and shakes Jan Arantes' hand. Riley then reveals his true motive, to destroy the mage tower Arantes with his own hands. Jan Arantes then addresses him. He explains that the mark is an oath of loyalty and proves Riley is now a member of the tower. With that, he snaps his fingers and declares the final test is over. Then, a portal opens beside him, and he invites Riley to enter. But Grimoire stops him, whispering that they need to do something before they leave. The two then share a knowing glance. Riley then asks to make his final move in the chess game before leaving. He announces he will move his pawn to the G8 square. When a pawn reaches the last rank, it receives a special privilege. At this, he promotes his pawn to a queen, declaring that this is a message for Jan Arantes. With the new piece in position, he then declares checkmate. He explains that one day, Riley, like the pawn, will become a queen and bring about his downfall, and then he says goodbye. The two then walk towards the portal. Jan Arantes reacts to the move and admits it was a good blow. As they step through the portal, Riley tells Grimoire that he ended the game with a checkmate just as they had planned. He worries the move might have seemed rebellious, but Grim believes Jan Arantes was impressed by his will to win. Grimoire then adds that the Archmage would never imagine a betrayal, and Riley asks why. Just then, a grand firework display begins outside. Then, Pamela von Hasselpart appears and says the fireworks are to celebrate the end of the test, lamenting that not everyone could see them. She then informs Riley that he is the last participant to finish. Pamela then notices the mark on his hand and assumes he has joined the Mage Tower Arantes. She then officially welcomes him to the tower. She instructs him to rest for 2 weeks and then use the return stone, which will take him and everything he is touching to the tower. Pamela explains that his trial period will begin as soon as he enters the tower and that he will become an official member after 2 missions. Furthermore, she informs him the process will take about 3 months, after which he'll be free to act independently. But she hints that after 3 months, these rules might change. Grimoire assumes she's referring to the round table meeting and the tower's plan to turn the continent upside down. Pamela then concludes her explanation, declaring that this year's selection test will officially end with his departure. Finally, she bids him farewell and thanks him for his work over the past 2 weeks, as the two of them head out into the snow. With the test over, Pamela approaches Riley and calls out to him. The competitor has now become a member of the tower, and she gives him a sincere welcome. She then disappears into the snow, and Riley remarks that she's gone. At this, he speculates that she also possesses the mystic element, and Rebecca and Garen approach, calling his name. Rebecca says they were worried and complains that the administrator kicked them out, but Riley recalls she said everyone had already left. She then dismisses it, saying the important thing is that they're okay. Garen suggests they head back, but Rebecca cuts him off. Then she points to the mark on Riley's hand. Rebecca and Garen then question him about how he can be completely fine after taking the oath of loyalty. Rebecca confronts him, reminding him that he promised not to join the Orontes Tower and would only do the interview. Then she grabs his hand and asks what this means. She shows him the mark and asks how he can be completely normal after taking the oath and not being affected by the heartworm. It's explained that the heartworm is a magic that punishes any betrayal used by the archmages of the 5 great towers. If the magic doesn't kill the mage, it means their loyalty is true. At that moment, Rebecca slaps Riley across the face. Riley just stares at her in silence. Rebecca then yells, asking how he could do this. She continues, saying she told him everything. And then she repeats the question, how could he betray her? But Garen holds her back, telling her that's enough. Rebecca calls him a traitor and screams that she'll kill him with her own hands. Garen stops her, stating that Riley has already made his decision and is no longer with them. Then Riley tells her to get out of his way and threatens her if he sees her again before turning to leave. He then suggests to Grimoire that they go back to their room, and his friend agrees. As they walk away, Riley reflects that he could feel her pain through their bond, but he doesn't like forced tragic stories. Grimoire suggests they get some snacks for the trip, but a knock on the door interrupts their conversation. Then, Olivia enters the room and greets Riley, relieved to still find him there. She notices the mark on his face and asks what happened, but Riley just replies that some things went down. Olivia then apologizes for interrupting, realizing they were about to leave. He says she doesn't need to apologize as he wanted to say goodbye anyway, and Olivia is happy with his response. Riley then comments to Grimoire that Olivia seems to be in a good mood, and he agrees. Olivia reveals she passed final test and congratulates Riley on his decision, explaining she heard about everyone's results except his. So Riley asks about the others, and she tells him that Arpel and Dorothy joined the Gaia Violet Tower as partners. She also informs him that Rebecca and Garen chose the Eucria Tower, while Pamela and Gilbert went to the Dwight Tower, but Dorian didn't pass. Grimoire, however, questions how Gilbert managed to pass, remembering he looked like a hopeless scarecrow in combat. Riley explains that while he's not a great fighter, Gilbert's orientation skills were better than Pamela's, and he found the core in 10 minutes. Olivia then prepares to talk about herself. She then announces she has joined the Jaden Groton Tower, and Riley congratulates her, saying the choice suits her. But Olivia claims she wouldn't have been able to pass the test if it weren't for him. She explains that without his help, she would have continued to live in pain, believing she was fine just because she possessed torture magic. Olivia explains that every time they called her a fool, she couldn't help but question herself. She wondered if she was on the right path or if ancient magic was just a dream. Then, she says these doubts followed her for a long time, but she affirms that Riley changed her life. Using the spell just once made her realize that her efforts hadn't been in vain. She then declares that she will continue to research ancient magic and that with the keyword he taught her, she will break even more spells. And Olivia promises that when she becomes a true mage, she will help him one day. Riley thanks her and says he'll keep that promise in mind. Later, the coachman asks if they're really staying there, but Riley assures him he'll protect him. The man still looks worried, and Riley turns to the carriage. He then tells someone to come out, stating he doesn't have much time. Riley insists he's busy, and the coachman wonders why he's talking to himself. Suddenly, the coachman gets slapped on the ear. Rebecca then appears, and the coachman screams that she's a ghost while she asks Riley if he brought a carriage. But Rebecca tells him to be quiet and snaps her fingers as the coachman keeps screaming. Rebecca asks how Riley's face is, and he replies that it still hurts as she apologizes. Then she reveals it was all an act to deceive the administrator's eyes. In Wilhelm, persistent gazes filled the entire place. Additionally, the Errant's Mage Tower used a vision-sharing magic to watch over all the competitors. Rebecca and Garen were worried about the plan, thinking it was too dangerous for him to act as a double agent, but Riley then proposed an alternative solution to the situation. Back in the present, Rebecca says the performance was convincing, and Riley praises her as a great actress. Grimoire believes that John Orontes didn't hear their conversation since the magic was only visual, and they wouldn't know about the solution to the heartworm. Rebecca then asks why Grimoire sent a clone, and he complains he didn't want to spend money on a carriage. But he reveals the real reason is that she and Garen decided to stay in Wilhelm for now to avoid raising suspicion. Meanwhile in Wilhelm, Garen complains that Rebecca hit too hard and she replies that he should have acted better. Garen then comments that Riley must have a solution for the heartworm and Riley confirms it. Grimm Moore then explains that the reason Riley isn't affected is his own existence and the authority of the bond between them. He details that the worm was designed to track a person's thoughts, but with him in Riley's mind, the system gets overloaded. Although Rebecca and Garen were against the plan, they must have felt relieved to see Riley was unaffected by the heartworm. Grimm War asks why Rebecca is staring at him like that. Rebecca accuses him of being a spy, but Riley proves his loyalty by insulting Jan Arantes, and she approves. She then asks if the problem with the heartworm is solved, but he replies, not exactly. Riley explains that Grimwar's presence is a temporary measure, and the worm will attack him if he acts like a spy. Then he reveals his plan for before the roundtable meeting. He plans to get rid of the heartworm in 3 months. Rebecca reacts to the statement saying it makes no sense. She explains that the process of neutralizing the worm takes at least 20 years, and most spies fail before then. But Riley reassures her, stating that it's all right. He then says he knows an expert, and the scene shifts to a skeletal figure on a throne. Then the skeletal figure, surrounded by eyes and plans for world domination, asks if anyone is there.